As we leave behind the harsh realities of medieval peasant life, let's journey forward in time. Our next historical exploration takes us to the tumultuous era of the French Revolution. Prepare to discover why this period was equally challenging for both the aristocracy and the common people. As we journey through the annals of history, let's turn our attention to the grandeur and complexity of ancient Rome. This civilization, spanning over 1,000 years, left an indelible mark on Western culture. From its humble beginnings as a small settlement on the banks of the Tiber River to its zenith as a vast empire, Rome's influence extended far beyond its borders. We'll explore the daily lives of Romans, their technological advancements, and the societal structures that shaped this remarkable civilization. As we journey back to ancient Rome, let's explore the bustling urban life that characterized this powerful empire. While Rome's grandeur is often celebrated, the reality for most city dwellers was far from glamorous. Picture yourself walking through the narrow, winding streets of a Roman city. The first thing you'd notice is the overwhelming stench. With no proper sewage system, waste often flowed freely in the streets. Chamber pots were emptied from upper windows, sometimes onto unsuspecting pedestrians below. The air was thick with the odors of human and animal waste, rotting food, and unwashed bodies. Housing for the average Roman was cramped and dangerous. Most lived in insulae, multi-story apartment buildings made of wood and mud brick. These structures were prone to collapse and fire, with the upper floors being the most precarious and least desirable. Families often shared a single room, lacking privacy and basic amenities like running water or toilets. The streets themselves were a hazard. Narrow and poorly lit, they became treacherous after dark. Muggings and assaults were common, and nighttime travel was a risky endeavor. During the day, the roads were clogged with carts, animals, and throngs of people, making navigation a constant challenge. Food safety was another major concern. Many Romans relied on street vendors for their meals, but sanitation standards were non-existent. Food poisoning was a regular occurrence, and contaminated water sources led to frequent outbreaks of disease. Speaking of disease, public health was a constant battle in Roman cities. With high population density and poor hygiene practices, illnesses spread rapidly. Malaria, tuberculosis, and various intestinal diseases were rampant. The average life expectancy in urban areas was shockingly low, often not exceeding 30 years. While Rome boasted impressive public works like aqueducts and bathhouses, access to clean water was still a luxury for many. The wealthy enjoyed private water supplies, while the poor often relied on public fountains that were easily contaminated. Employment for the lower classes was precarious and often dangerous. Many worked as day laborers, struggling to find consistent work and barely earning enough to survive. Workplace safety was non-existent, and injuries were common in professions like construction or metalworking. Despite these hardships, Roman cities were centers of culture and commerce. Public spectacles like gladiatorial games and chariot races provided entertainment, though often at the cost of human life. The forum bustled with political debates and market activities, offering a glimpse of the empire's power and reach. As we reflect on Roman urban life, it's clear that while the empire achieved great feats of engineering and governance, daily life for the average citizen was fraught with challenges and discomforts we can scarcely imagine today. As we continue our soporific journey through history, let's immerse ourselves in the tepid waters of Roman baths. These ancient public bathing facilities were far more than just places to get clean. They were social hubs, places of relaxation, and symbols of Roman engineering prowess. Roman baths or thermae were typically divided into several rooms, each serving a different purpose. The first room, known as the apoditerium, was where bathers would undress and store their belongings. From there, they would move to the tepidarium, a warm room designed to prepare the body for the hotter areas to come. The caldarium was the hottest room in the bath complex, heated by an ingenious system called a hypocaust. This underground heating system circulated hot air beneath the floor and through hollow tiles in the walls. The intense heat in the caldarium was believed to open the pores and purge the body of impurities. For those seeking a more invigorating experience, there was the frigidarium. This cold pool provided a shocking contrast to the heat of the caldarium and was thought to close the pores and invigorate the body. Some larger bath complexes even included an atatio, an open-air swimming pool for those who preferred a more active bathing experience. The baths were not just about cleanliness, but also about socializing. Romans would spend hours in the baths discussing politics, conducting business, or simply gossiping with friends. Some facilities even included libraries, exercise rooms, and gardens, making them true community centers. Interestingly, the water in Roman baths was not always changed as frequently as we might hope. In fact, it was often reused for days or even weeks at a time. The Romans believed that stagnant water had healing properties, a notion that seems rather unappealing to our modern sensibilities. Despite this, the baths were generally considered beneficial to public health. They provided a place for people of all social classes to maintain personal hygiene, which was particularly important in crowded urban areas. However, the shared bathing water and communal nature of the facilities also made them potential breeding grounds for disease. As the Roman Empire expanded, so did the practice of public bathing. Bath complexes were built throughout the empire, from Britain to North Africa. Even today, we can still see the remnants of these impressive structures in places like Bath, England, and Caracalla in Rome. The tradition of public bathing declined with the fall of the Roman Empire, but its influence can still be seen in modern spa culture. So, the next time you visit a spa or public pool, remember that you're participating in a tradition that dates back over 2,000 years to the bustling bathhouses of ancient Rome. As we delve deeper into the annals of history, let's turn our attention to the culinary habits of ancient Rome. The Roman diet, while varied, was far from the lavish feasts we might imagine when thinking of togas and grand colosseums. For the average Roman, the daily fare was simple and repetitive. The staple food was a porridge called poules, made from boiled grains such as wheat, millet, or barley. This bland concoction formed the basis of most meals, providing sustenance but little excitement for the taste buds. Bread was another cornerstone of the Roman diet. However, the quality varied greatly depending on social status. The wealthy enjoyed finely milled white bread, while the poor subsisted on coarse, dark loaves that were often adulterated with sawdust or other fillers to stretch supplies. Vegetables played a significant role in Roman cuisine, with cabbage, onions, and garlic being particularly popular. Legumes like lentils and beans were also consumed in large quantities, providing an important source of protein for those who couldn't afford meat regularly. Speaking of meat, it was a luxury for most Romans. The common folk might enjoy small portions of pork or chicken on special occasions, but beef was rare and expensive. Fish and seafood were more common, especially in coastal areas, but still not an everyday indulgence for the average citizen. Olive oil was ubiquitous in Roman cooking, used for frying, as a condiment, and even as a lamp fuel. Wine, too, was a daily beverage, though it was usually watered down to prevent intoxication and stretch supplies. The quality of wine, like bread, varied greatly based on social status. Fruit was seasonal and often preserved through drying. Figs, grapes, and apples were common, while exotic fruits like peaches and apricots were introduced later through trade with distant lands. The Roman approach to seasoning was quite different from our modern palate. They had a particular fondness for a fermented fish sauce called garum, which was used to add saltiness and umami to dishes. To our modern tastes, it might seem overpowering, but for Romans, it was an essential condiment. Honey was the primary sweetener, used in both food and drink. Sugar, as we know it, was unknown to the Romans, making honey a precious commodity. While the wealthy could indulge in elaborate multi-course meals with rare delicacies, the majority of Romans ate simply and frugally. Their diet, while nutritionally adequate, was far from varied or exciting by today's standards. The monotony of daily meals would have been a stark contrast to the grandeur of Roman architecture and military might. As we reflect on the Roman diet, we're reminded that even great civilizations had their mundane aspects. The contrast between the magnificent structures they built and the simple fare they consumed is a testament to the complexity of ancient societies. As we drift through the annals of history, let's turn our attention to the entertainment of ancient Rome. While we might think of gladiatorial combat as the pinnacle of Roman amusement, there was much more to their leisure activities than just bloodshed in the arena. The Romans, like many civilizations, enjoyed a variety of spectacles and diversions. One popular form of entertainment was the theater. Plays were performed in large, open-air amphitheaters, often adapting Greek tragedies or creating new comedies that poked fun at contemporary Roman life. These performances were accessible to all social classes, providing a shared cultural experience for both patricians and plebeians alike. Another favorite pastime was chariot racing, held in massive structures called circuses. The Circus Maximus in Rome could hold up to 250,000 spectators, making it the largest sports arena in the ancient world. Charioteers, representing different racing factions, would compete in dangerous and exciting races, drawing fervent support from the crowds. The Romans also indulged in more relaxing pursuits. Public baths, or thermae, were not just for hygiene but served as social hubs where people could gossip, exercise, and even attend lectures or poetry readings. These sprawling complexes often included libraries, gymnasiums, and gardens, offering a multifaceted recreational experience. For those seeking intellectual stimulation, philosophy schools and public debates were popular. Orators would gather in forums to discuss politics, ethics, and other weighty topics, attracting audiences eager to hear skilled speakers argue their points. Religious festivals played a significant role in Roman entertainment as well. These events often combined religious rituals with public games, feasts, and theatrical performances. The Saturnalia, for instance, was a week-long celebration in December that involved role reversals between masters and slaves, gift-giving, and general merrymaking. Of course, we can't ignore the infamous gladiatorial games. While they were indeed a central part of Roman entertainment, it's worth noting that these spectacles were not as frequent as popular culture might suggest. Major games were typically held only a few times a year, often coinciding with important political or religious events. The Romans also enjoyed various board games and gambling activities. Dice games were particularly popular, with some emperors even being known for their love of gaming. Archaeological evidence has revealed gaming boards carved into the steps of public buildings, suggesting that casual game playing was a common way to pass the time. As we conclude our brief exploration of Roman entertainment, it's clear that their leisure activities were as diverse and complex as their society itself. From the grandeur of the circus to the intimacy of a game of dice, the Romans found myriad ways to amuse themselves and escape the daily grind of ancient life. As we delve into the realm of Roman medicine, prepare to be both impressed and slightly horrified. The Romans, known for their engineering marvels and military prowess, also made significant strides in medical practices. However, their methods often teetered on the edge between innovative and downright dangerous. Let's start with the positives. Roman physicians were among the first to recognize the importance of hygiene in medical practice. They understood that cleanliness could prevent the spread of disease, a concept that wouldn't become widespread until centuries later. Roman doctors would meticulously wash their hands and sterilize their instruments before surgeries, a practice that was truly ahead of its time. The Romans also made significant advancements in surgical techniques. They developed specialized tools for different procedures, including forceps, scalpels, and even a device similar to modern-day surgical clamps. Their military doctors became particularly skilled at treating battle wounds, performing amputations, and even attempting basic forms of plastic surgery to reduce scarring. However, not all Roman medical practices were so admirable. Many of their treatments were based on superstition and misunderstandings about the human body. For instance, they believed in the theory of the four humors: blood, phlegm, yellow bile, and black bile. This led to treatments like bloodletting, where they would drain blood from a patient to restore the balance of these humors. Speaking of bloodletting, the Romans had a particular fondness for leeches. These slimy creatures were used to treat everything from headaches to hemorrhoids. Imagine going to the doctor with a migraine only to have leeches attached to your temples. It's enough to make you grateful for modern painkillers. Roman doctors also had some rather unusual remedies in their arsenal. For example, they believed that gladiator blood had healing properties. After battles, people would rush to drink the blood of fallen gladiators, thinking it could cure epilepsy and other ailments. It's safe to say that this particular treatment didn't stand the test of time. Another interesting, if not entirely pleasant, Roman medical practice involved the use of urine. Yes, you heard that right. Urine was used as a mouthwash, believed to whiten teeth and prevent decay. The ammonia in urine does have some antibacterial properties, but I think we can all agree that modern toothpaste is a much more palatable option. Despite these questionable practices, it's important to note that Roman medicine laid the groundwork for many modern medical concepts. They were among the first to establish hospitals, create medical texts, and train physicians in a systematic way. Their understanding of anatomy, while not perfect, was far more advanced than many of their contemporaries. So the next time you visit a doctor's office, take a moment to appreciate how far we've come. While you might encounter the occasional unpleasant procedure, At least you won't be prescribed a cup of gladiator blood or urine mouthwash. Roman medicine, for all its faults, was a crucial stepping stone in the development of the medical practices we rely on today. Moving from the fields of medieval Europe, let's journey back even further in time to ancient Rome, where slavery was a cornerstone of society. The Roman Empire, for all its grandeur and achievements, was built on the backs of countless slaves. Slavery in Rome was not based on race, as it would be in later centuries. Instead, anyone could become a slave through various means. Prisoners of war, victims of piracy, abandoned children, and even those who couldn't pay their debts could find themselves stripped of their freedom and sold into bondage. The life of a Roman slave was often brutal and short. They had no legal rights and were considered property, not people. Their masters had complete control over their lives, including the power of life and death. Slaves could be bought, sold, or given away at their owner's whim, tearing families apart without a second thought. Slave labor was used in every aspect of Roman life. In wealthy households, slaves worked as cooks, cleaners, and personal attendants. In the fields, they toiled under the scorching sun, planting and harvesting crops. In mines and quarries, they faced dangerous conditions, often working until they literally dropped dead from exhaustion. Some slaves were forced to become gladiators, fighting to the death for the entertainment of the masses. Others were subjected to sexual exploitation, with no recourse against their abusers. The suffering of these individuals was immense and often overlooked in the grand narratives of Roman history. While some slaves, particularly those in urban households, might have better conditions, the constant threat of punishment loomed over all. Beatings were common, and more severe punishments, such as branding or crucifixion, were used to maintain control and discourage rebellion. The Roman economy was so dependent on slave labor that it's estimated that during the empire's peak, nearly one-third of the population in Italy were slaves. This massive underclass was essential for maintaining the luxurious lifestyles of the Roman elite and the functioning of the empire itself. Manumission, or the freeing of slaves, did occur, but it was far from common. Some slaves were able to buy their freedom if they managed to save enough money, while others were freed as a reward for loyal service or in their master's will. However, even freed slaves often faced discrimination and limited opportunities in Roman society. The institution of slavery in Rome was so ingrained that it persisted for centuries, only gradually declining with the fall of the Western Roman Empire. Its legacy would continue to influence European society for generations to come, shaping attitudes and practices that would have far-reaching consequences throughout history. As we conclude our journey through ancient Rome, it's clear that life for the average Roman was far from the glamorous depictions we often see in movies. While the empire's achievements in architecture, law, and engineering were impressive, daily existence for most citizens was a constant struggle. The stark divide between the wealthy elite and the common people created a society rife with inequality. Plebeians, who made up the majority of the population, faced numerous challenges, from inadequate housing in overcrowded insulae to the constant threat of disease in unsanitary conditions. The Roman diet, while varied, was often insufficient for the poor, leading to malnutrition and health issues. Clean water was a luxury, and many relied on wine as a safer alternative, contributing to widespread alcohol consumption. Employment was precarious, with many relying on day labor or dangerous jobs in mines and quarries. The constant threat of war and invasion loomed over the populace, and military service was a dreaded obligation for many young men. While Rome's legacy includes great advancements, it's crucial to remember that these came at a cost. The daily lives of ordinary Romans were marked by hardship, uncertainty, and a constant struggle for survival. As we drift off to sleep, let's appreciate the comforts of our modern world, so different from the challenging realities of ancient Rome. Now that we've explored the harsh realities of medieval peasant life, let's shift our focus to another equally challenging period in history. As we journey through time, we'll discover how different eras presented their own unique set of difficulties for the common folk. As we delve deeper into the miseries of medieval life, we encounter perhaps the most terrifying aspect of all, the plague. This devastating disease swept through Europe, leaving death and despair in its wake. Imagine living in constant fear, never knowing if the next cough or fever might be your last. The Black Death, as it came to be known, was more than just a medical crisis. It was a societal catastrophe that reshaped the very fabric of medieval existence. Let's explore how this invisible enemy turned the already difficult lives of peasants into a true nightmare. As we delve deeper into the miseries of medieval life, we encounter one of the most devastating phenomena of the era, the plague. But where did this horrific disease come from, and how did it spread so rapidly across Europe? The origins of the plague, particularly the infamous Black Death of the 14th century, can be traced back to Central Asia. It's believed that the disease first emerged in the arid plains of Central Asia, where it was endemic in populations of ground rodents such as marmots. From there, the plague began its deadly journey westward. It traveled along the Silk Road, the ancient network of trade routes connecting East Asia and the Mediterranean world. Merchant caravans unknowingly carried more than just silks and spices. They brought with them infected rats and fleas, the primary vectors of the disease. The plague reached the Black Sea port of Kaffa, modern-day Feodosia in Crimea, in 1347. Legend has it that the Mongol army, besieging the city, catapulted plague-infested corpses over the city walls. While this tale is dramatic, it's more likely that the disease spread through more mundane means, infected rats on trade ships. From Kaffa, the plague hitched a ride on merchant ships sailing to Constantinople, then to Sicily, and finally to mainland Europe. The cramped, unsanitary conditions aboard these vessels provided the perfect breeding ground for rats and fleas, allowing the disease to flourish. By 1348, the plague had reached England, and within 2 years it had spread throughout most of Europe. The speed at which it traveled was terrifying, approximately 1.5 miles per day overland and up to 75 miles per day by ship. But what made this disease so deadly? The plague actually came in 3 forms: bubonic, pneumonic, and septicemic. The most common was bubonic plague, characterized by swollen, painful lymph nodes called buboes. This form had a mortality rate of 30–60%. Pneumonic plague, which infected the lungs, was even deadlier, with a near 100% mortality rate. It could spread directly from person to person through respiratory droplets, making it particularly dangerous in the crowded, close-quartered living conditions of medieval towns and cities. The rapid spread and high mortality rate of the plague were exacerbated by medieval living conditions. Poor sanitation, lack of medical knowledge, and close proximity to animals all contributed to the disease's devastating impact. Rats, which carried the infected fleas, thrived in the filthy streets and homes of medieval towns. Moreover, the medieval understanding of disease was based on the theory of miasma, or bad air. This led to ineffective treatments and preventive measures, such as carrying fragrant herbs or burning aromatic woods, which did little to stop the actual spread of the disease. As if life wasn't already challenging enough for medieval peasants, the arrival of the plague brought a new level of horror and suffering. Let's delve into the gruesome symptoms that afflicted those unfortunate enough to contract this devastating disease. The most common form of plague during the medieval period was the bubonic plague. Its first sign was often a sudden onset of fever, accompanied by severe chills and body aches. Victims would experience extreme fatigue, making even the simplest tasks feel impossible. Within days, the most notorious symptom would appear: buboes. These painful, swollen lymph nodes, typically found in the groin, armpits, or neck, could grow to the size of eggs. The skin around these buboes would turn a sickening shade of purple or black, giving rise to the plague's nickname, the Black Death. As the disease progressed, victims might develop pneumonia, causing difficulty breathing and coughing up blood. The lack of proper medical knowledge meant that these symptoms were often misunderstood and feared, leading to further isolation of the sick. In some cases, the plague would manifest as septicemic plague, where the bacteria would infect the blood directly. This form was particularly deadly, often killing its victims within 24 hours. Those afflicted would experience skin turning black, especially on the nose, fingers, and toes, earning it the name Black Plague. Perhaps the most terrifying aspect for medieval peasants was the speed at which the plague could claim lives. A person could appear healthy one day and be dead within a week. This rapid progression added to the panic and despair that swept through communities. The plague also had psychological effects on its victims. Many experienced confusion, delirium, and even violent outbursts as the disease ravaged their bodies and minds. These symptoms only added to the fear and stigma surrounding those who fell ill. For those who managed to survive the initial onslaught of symptoms, recovery was a long and arduous process. Many were left weakened and susceptible to other illnesses, while others bore physical scars from the buboes that had ravaged their bodies. The horrific nature of these symptoms, combined with the lack of effective treatments, made the plague a truly terrifying prospect for medieval peasants. It's no wonder that many turned to superstition and prayer in the face of such a devastating and mysterious illness. As if the plague itself wasn't bad enough, the treatments for this devastating disease were often just as horrifying. Medieval medicine was a far cry from our modern understanding of health and disease, and the methods used to combat the Black Death were often based on superstition and misguided theories. One popular treatment was bloodletting, a practice that involved cutting open a vein to drain bad blood from the body. Physicians believed that by releasing this tainted blood, they could restore the body's balance of humors and cure the plague. In reality, this weakened patients further, making them even more susceptible to the disease. Another common approach was the use of herbal remedies. While some herbs did have medicinal properties, others were completely ineffective or even toxic. One such concoction was a mixture of dried toad parts which was ground into a powder and applied to the plague buboes. Needless to say, this did little to help the afflicted. Some doctors recommended more bizarre treatments, such as applying a live chicken to the swollen lymph nodes. The idea was that the chicken would draw out the pestilential vapor from the patient's body. Unsurprisingly, this method proved to be utterly useless. In a desperate attempt to ward off the plague, many people turned to aromatherapy. They believed that strong smells could purify the air and protect them from the disease. This led to the creation of plague masks worn by doctors, featuring long beaks stuffed with aromatic herbs and spices. While these masks did offer some protection by keeping a distance between the doctor and patient, the herbs themselves did nothing to prevent infection. One of the most gruesome treatments involved lancing and draining the plague buboes. This painful procedure was performed without anesthesia and often led to severe infections. In some cases, the buboes were cauterized with hot irons, causing excruciating pain and leaving permanent scars. Religious practices also played a significant role in plague treatments. Many believed that the disease was a punishment from God, leading to increased prayer, fasting, and self-flagellation. Some even went as far as to organize processions of flagellants, who would whip themselves in public as a form of penance. Perhaps the most ironic treatment was the consumption of various elixirs and potions. These often contained ingredients like mercury or arsenic, which were toxic in their own right. In their desperation to find a cure, people were essentially poisoning themselves. As we now know, none of these treatments were effective in combating the plague. In fact, many of them likely contributed to the high mortality rate by weakening patients or exposing them to additional health risks. It wasn't until centuries later that the true cause of the plague, bacteria spread by fleas, was discovered, paving the way for more effective treatments and prevention methods. The Black Death didn't just claim lives, it reshaped the very fabric of medieval society. As the plague ravaged Europe, it left behind a landscape of empty villages and abandoned fields. This sudden depopulation had far-reaching consequences that would alter the course of history. One of the most significant impacts was on the labor market. With so many workers dead, the surviving peasants found themselves in an unprecedented position of power. For the first time, they could demand better wages and working conditions from their lords. This shift in the balance of power between peasants and nobility was a seismic change in medieval society. Lords, accustomed to an abundance of cheap labor, now had to compete for workers. Some even offered freedom from serfdom as an incentive. We've toiled in these fields for generations, but now, with so few of us left, we can finally ask for what we deserve. It's a small comfort in these dark times. The plague also accelerated social mobility. As entire families were wiped out, their property and positions became available to others. This created opportunities for survivors to climb the social ladder in ways that were previously unthinkable. We see evidence of peasants acquiring land, merchants expanding their businesses, and even some commoners rising to positions of local authority. The rigid social hierarchy of the Middle Ages was beginning to show cracks. However, these changes didn't come without resistance. The nobility and wealthy merchants, threatened by the shifting dynamics, pushed for laws to maintain the status quo. The Statute of Labourers in England, for example, attempted to cap wages and restrict worker movement. We cannot allow these low-born peasants to dictate terms. Order must be maintained, lest the entire kingdom fall into chaos. Despite such efforts, the social impact of the plague was irreversible. It sowed the seeds of discontent that would later fuel peasant revolts across Europe. The Peasants' Revolt of 1381 in England and the Jacquerie Uprising in France were direct results of this new social consciousness. The plague also had a profound effect on religious beliefs and practices. Many saw the disease as divine punishment, leading to increased religious fervor. This manifested in various ways, from the rise of flagellant movements to growing skepticism towards the Church's ability to protect its flock. As communities grappled with the immense loss of life, cultural attitudes towards death began to shift. The concept of the dance of death, or dance macabre, became prevalent in art and literature, emphasizing the universality of death regardless of social status. In my paintings, I show death leading all manner of people, popes, kings, peasants, in a final dance. It reminds us that in the face of such devastation, we are all equal. The plague's impact extended to education and intellectual life as well. With many scholars and teachers among the dead, there was a temporary setback in learning. However, this also created opportunities for new ideas to emerge and spread. As if the Black Death wasn't terrifying enough on its own, the rituals and practices surrounding plague deaths were equally grim. When someone in a medieval village showed signs of the plague, it set off a chain of events that would make anyone's skin crawl. First, the plague doctors would arrive. These weren't your friendly neighborhood physicians. They wore long, beaked masks filled with aromatic herbs, believing it would purify the air they breathed. Imagine seeing that looming figure at your doorstep, knowing they were there to confirm your worst fears. Once a plague victim died, the body had to be disposed of quickly to prevent further spread of the disease. But here's where things got really macabre. Instead of a loving funeral surrounded by family and friends, plague victims were often buried in mass graves called plague pits. These pits were dug outside of town, and bodies were unceremoniously dumped in, layer upon layer. Sometimes, lime would be sprinkled over the corpses to speed up decomposition. The sheer number of dead often overwhelmed gravediggers, leading to horrific scenes of bodies piling up in streets and houses. But it wasn't just the dead who suffered. If you were lucky enough to survive when a family member got sick, you'd be locked in your house with them. That's right, entire families were quarantined together, often nailed into their homes from the outside. A red cross would be painted on the door, warning others to stay away. Imagine being trapped inside with your dying loved ones, knowing that you'd likely be next. Food and water would be left at the door, but otherwise you were on your own. The psychological toll of this isolation, coupled with the near certainty of death, must have been unbearable. In some areas, plague victims were sent to pest houses, essentially, places to die. These were often converted barns or hastily constructed sheds where the sick were left to either recover or perish. Conditions were abysmal, with little to no medical care available. Perhaps the most chilling aspect of plague death rituals was the use of plague bells. These were small bells tied to the wrists or ankles of plague victims. Why, you ask? Well, sometimes people were buried alive by mistake due to the rush to dispose of bodies. The bell was a last-ditch effort to signal if someone woke up in their grave. So the next time you're annoyed about having to wear a mask or use hand sanitizer, just remember, at least you're not listening for the faint tinkle of a plague bell from the local graveyard. Medieval plague rituals truly were the stuff of nightmares. The Black Death's impact on medieval society was profound and long-lasting. As the plague receded, the survivors found themselves in a drastically altered world. With a significantly reduced population, the balance of power between peasants and landowners began to shift. Labor became scarce, and for the first time, peasants had leverage to demand better wages and working conditions. Some even left their manors in search of better opportunities, a concept previously unthinkable in the rigid feudal system. However, this newfound bargaining power was met with resistance from the nobility. Laws were enacted to keep wages artificially low and restrict peasant movement, leading to increased tensions and, in some cases, outright rebellion. The plague also had a profound impact on religious beliefs and practices. Many questioned the Church's inability to prevent or cure the disease, leading to a decline in its authority and the rise of new spiritual movements. In the realm of medicine, the failure of traditional remedies during the plague spurred a renewed interest in empirical observation and practical treatments. laying the groundwork for modern medical practices. Ultimately, while the Black Death was a catastrophic event that caused immense suffering, it also catalyzed significant social, economic, and cultural changes that would shape the transition from the medieval period to the early modern era. As we leave behind the hardships of medieval peasant life, let's turn our attention to another equally mundane aspect of history. Our next topic will explore the thrilling world of ancient grain storage techniques. Prepare yourself for a riveting journey through the evolution of silos and granaries. As we leave behind the toils of medieval peasantry, let's journey even further back in time to the banks of the Nile. Ancient Egypt, a civilization that flourished for over 3 millennia, captivates our imagination with its grand pyramids and enigmatic hieroglyphs. But what was daily life really like for the average ancient Egyptian? Beyond the glamour of pharaohs and their monumental tombs, a complex society existed, filled with both wonders and hardships. In the next segment, we'll explore the mundane realities of ancient Egyptian life, from the scorching heat of the desert to the arduous labor that built an empire. As we drift further back in time, let's explore the housing situation in ancient Egypt. While the pharaohs lived in grand palaces and the wealthy enjoyed spacious homes, the majority of Egyptians resided in much simpler dwellings. Most ancient Egyptians lived in modest mud brick houses. These structures were practical, utilizing readily available materials from the Nile River Valley. The process of creating these homes was straightforward but labor-intensive. Workers would mix mud from the Nile with straw, form it into bricks, and leave them to dry in the hot Egyptian sun. The typical Egyptian house was small and cramped by modern standards. A family of 5 or 6 might share a living space no larger than 100 square meters. The layout usually consisted of a central room for living and sleeping, surrounded by smaller rooms for storage or specific tasks. Windows were small and placed high on the walls to minimize the intense heat and glare of the Egyptian sun. Roofs were generally flat and made from wooden beams covered with palm fronds and mud. In the cooler months, these roofs served as additional living space where families could gather in the evenings. Furniture was sparse and simple. Most people slept on reed mats laid directly on the floor. Wealthier families might have wooden bed frames with linen sheets. Storage chests, low tables, and stools were common, but chairs were a luxury reserved for the upper classes. Cooking was typically done outside to prevent the house from overheating. Many homes had small courtyards where families would prepare meals, often consisting of bread, vegetables, and occasionally fish or poultry. Sanitation was basic at best. Most houses lacked indoor plumbing, and waste disposal was a constant challenge. In some urban areas, there were primitive sewage systems, but for most Egyptians, waste management was a daily struggle that contributed to the spread of disease. Despite these challenges, Egyptian homes were designed with climate in mind. The thick mud brick walls provided excellent insulation, keeping interiors cool during the scorching days and warm during chilly desert nights. Some houses even featured early forms of air conditioning, using porous water jugs to cool the air through evaporation. As we ponder these ancient dwellings, it's worth noting that while they may seem primitive to us, they represented a significant advancement in human living conditions compared to earlier nomadic lifestyles. The development of permanent housing was a crucial step in the formation of complex societies and the rise of great civilizations like ancient Egypt. Moving from medieval Europe to ancient Egypt, let's explore the work life of the average Egyptian. While we often think of grand pyramids and powerful pharaohs, the reality for most Egyptians was far less glamorous. The majority of ancient Egyptians were farmers, toiling in the fields along the Nile River. Their lives revolved around the annual flooding of the Nile, which determined their work cycles. During the flood season, from July to October, farmers couldn't work their fields. Instead, they were often conscripted for large-scale construction projects. When the floods receded, the real work began. Farmers had to quickly plow, sow, and tend to their crops before the hot, dry season arrived. They used simple tools like wooden plows pulled by oxen and harvested by hand with sickles. The work was backbreaking and relentless, performed under the scorching Egyptian sun. But it wasn't just farmers who had it tough. Craftsmen and artisans, while more skilled, also faced challenging work conditions. Stone masons, for example, spent their days quarrying and carving massive blocks of limestone or granite. They used copper chisels and bronze saws, tools that were effective but required constant sharpening and replacement. Imagine the physical toll of repeatedly striking stone with a mallet and chisel, or the strain of moving multi-ton blocks using only ropes, levers, and manpower. These workers often developed arthritis and other joint problems due to the repetitive nature of their work. For those involved in building projects like temples or tombs, work could be seasonal. During the flood season, when farming was impossible, thousands of workers would be gathered for these massive undertakings. They lived in temporary workers' villages, separated from their families for months at a time. The concept of workplace safety was virtually non-existent. Accidents were common, and medical treatment was primitive by today's standards. A serious injury could mean the end of a worker's ability to provide for their family. Even skilled scribes, who might seem to have had an easier life, faced their own challenges. They spent long hours in dim light, hunched over papyrus scrolls, meticulously recording inventories, laws, and religious texts. This sedentary work often led to poor eyesight and back problems. It's worth noting that while slavery existed in ancient Egypt, it wasn't as widespread as in some other ancient civilizations. Most workers were free, but they were still bound by a rigid social hierarchy and obligations to the state and religious institutions. So while we may admire the grand achievements of ancient Egypt, it's important to remember the countless unnamed individuals whose labor made it all possible. Their daily lives were filled with hard work, physical strain, and the constant struggle to survive in a world where the average life expectancy was only about 35 years. As we continue our journey through history's most sleep-inducing facts, let's turn our attention to the ancient Egyptian diet. While pharaohs and nobles might have feasted on exotic delicacies, the average Egyptian's menu was far less exciting. The staple food for most Egyptians was bread made from emmer wheat or barley. This wasn't the fluffy, sliced bread we know today. Instead, imagine a dense, flat loaf that often contained bits of sand from the grinding process. Nothing says sweet dreams quite like pretty bread, right? To complement their bread, Egyptians consumed a variety of vegetables. Onions and garlic were particularly popular, not just for their flavor, but also for their supposed medicinal properties. Other common vegetables included lentils, peas, and beans. Leafy greens like lettuce and celery were also part of the daily diet. Fruits were a treat when in season. Dates and figs were prized for their sweetness and were often dried for preservation. Grapes, pomegranates, and melons also made appearances on Egyptian tables when available. Meat was a luxury for most Egyptians. The wealthy might enjoy beef, but for the average person, meat was usually limited to fish from the Nile or poultry. Geese, ducks, and quail were common, while pigeons were considered a delicacy. On special occasions, people might indulge in goat or sheep meat. To wash down their meals, Egyptians had a few beverage options. Water, of course, was the most common drink, typically drawn from wells or the Nile and stored in porous clay jars to keep it cool. For those who could afford it, beer was a popular choice. Made from partially baked barley bread, Egyptian beer was thick, nutritious, and had a lower alcohol content than modern beers. Wine was another option, but it was generally reserved for the upper classes or special occasions. It was made from grapes or dates and was often flavored with herbs or spices. The Egyptian diet was largely shaped by the Nile's annual flood cycle. During the inundation period, when farmlands were underwater, preserved foods like dried fish and stored grains became crucial. Interestingly, the ancient Egyptians didn't use many spices in their cooking. Salt and cumin were common, but otherwise their food was relatively bland by modern standards. Perhaps they were onto something with their sleep-friendly, unexciting cuisine. So as you drift off to sleep, imagine yourself as an ancient Egyptian, ending your day with a meal of gritty bread, some pungent onions, and a bowl of thick, lukewarm beer. It's a far cry from a modern gourmet dinner, but it kept millions of Egyptians going for thousands of years. Sweet dreams, and may your slumber be as deep as the sands of the Sahara. As we drift further into the annals of ancient history, let's turn our gaze to the mystical world of Egyptian religion. The beliefs of ancient Egyptians were as complex and layered as the very pyramids they built. At the heart of Egyptian religion was the concept of Ma'at, representing truth, balance, and cosmic order. This principle governed not just their spiritual lives, but also their understanding of the universe and society. The ancient Egyptians worshipped a vast pantheon of gods and goddesses, each with their own unique roles and attributes. Among the most prominent were Ra, the sun god, Osiris, god of the afterlife, Isis, goddess of motherhood and magic, and Anubis, the jackal-headed god of mummification. These deities were often depicted in intricate hieroglyphics and grand statues, their animal-headed forms a testament to the Egyptians' close connection with nature. The pharaoh, considered a living god, acted as an intermediary between the mortal world and the divine realm. One of the most fascinating aspects of Egyptian religion was their elaborate belief in the afterlife. The process of mummification, which could take up to 70 days, was designed to preserve the body for its journey into the next world. The Book of the Dead, a collection of spells and instructions, was often buried with the deceased to guide them through the perils of the underworld. It included the famous weighing of the heart ceremony, where the heart of the deceased was weighed against the feather of Maat to determine their worthiness for eternal life. Temples played a crucial role in Egyptian religious life. These massive structures, like the Temple of Karnak, were considered the homes of the gods. Priests performed daily rituals to care for the deity's statue, believed to house the god's spirit. The annual flooding of the Nile was intimately tied to religious beliefs, seen as a gift from the gods that brought fertility to the land. This cycle of death and rebirth was mirrored in many Egyptian myths, most notably in the story of Osiris, who was murdered and resurrected. Despite its polytheistic nature, some scholars argue that Egyptian religion showed early signs of monotheism, particularly during the reign of Akhenaten, who promoted the worship of a single sun god, Aten. The enduring legacy of Egyptian religion can still be felt today, from the popular fascination with mummies and pyramids to the influence it had on later religions and philosophical traditions. As we close our eyes and imagine the grand temples along the Nile, we can almost hear the chants of ancient priests echoing through time, a lullaby from a civilization long past. As we delve into the realm of ancient Egyptian medicine, prepare to be both fascinated and slightly horrified by their unconventional practices. The Egyptians were pioneers in many fields, but their medical treatments often bordered on the bizarre. Let's start with their approach to diagnosing illnesses. Egyptian physicians believed that the heart was the center of thought and emotion, not the brain. They would often examine a patient's heart rate and pulse to determine the cause of various ailments. This wasn't entirely misguided, but it did lead to some interesting conclusions. One of their go-to remedies for almost everything was the use of animal dung. Yes, you heard that correctly. Crocodile dung was a popular choice, often applied topically or even ingested for various ailments. They believed it had magical properties that could cure anything from toothaches to prevent pregnancy. I'm sure you can imagine how well that worked out. Speaking of pregnancy, Egyptian contraceptives were equally unconventional. Women would use pessaries made from a mixture of honey, sodium carbonate, and crocodile dung. This concoction was believed to have spermicidal properties. While there might have been some scientific basis for this, given the acidic nature of the mixture, it's safe to say it wasn't the most reliable method. When it came to treating wounds, the Egyptians had some surprisingly effective techniques mixed with questionable ones. They used honey as an antiseptic, which modern science has proven to have antibacterial properties. However, they also believed that applying meat to a wound could help it heal faster. Fresh meat was thought to have regenerative powers, but in reality, it likely introduced more bacteria and increased the risk of infection. Egyptian dentistry was particularly cringeworthy. To treat a toothache, they might drill holes in your jaw to drain abscesses or pack the cavity with a mixture of ground-up mice and dough. Yes, you read that correctly, mice were a common ingredient in many Egyptian remedies. They believed that mice, being able to chew through almost anything, could transfer their tooth strength to humans. Perhaps one of the most infamous Egyptian medical practices was trepanation, the process of drilling holes in the skull to relieve pressure or release evil spirits. This procedure was performed on living patients, often without any form of anesthesia. Surprisingly, evidence suggests that some individuals survived this ordeal, as archaeologists have found skulls with healed trepanation marks. Despite these questionable practices, the Egyptians did make some significant contributions to medicine. They were among the first to use splints for broken bones and developed an early form of prosthetics. They also had a rudimentary understanding of the circulatory system, even if they attributed more importance to the heart than was accurate. So the next time you complain about modern medicine, remember that at least you're not being prescribed a dose of crocodile dung or having holes drilled in your skull. Egyptian medicine, while groundbreaking in some ways, certainly had its fair share of methods that would make any modern patient run for the hills. As we drift through the sands of time, let's explore the intricate and somewhat unsettling world of ancient Egyptian death rituals. These practices were far from simple and certainly not for the faint of heart. The Egyptians believed that death was merely a transition to another realm, and they went to great lengths to ensure a smooth journey for the deceased. The process began immediately after death, with the body being washed and purified. Next came the rather gruesome process of mummification. This wasn't just wrapping the body in bandages, it was a complex procedure that took about 70 days. First, they would remove the brain through the nostrils using a hook. Yes, you heard that correctly, through the nostrils. The embalmers then made an incision in the left side of the body to remove most of the internal organs. These organs were preserved separately in canopic jars, each protected by a specific god. The heart, however, was left in place, as it was believed to be the seat of intelligence and emotion. The body was then covered with natron, a type of salt, to dry it out. This process took about 40 days. Once dehydrated, the body was stuffed with linen and other materials to give it a more lifelike appearance. The final step was wrapping the body in layers of linen bandages, often with protective amulets placed between the layers. This mummification process was believed to preserve the body for the afterlife, allowing the deceased's spirit to recognize and return to it. But the rituals didn't end there. The mummy was then placed in a series of nested coffins, the outermost often being a stone sarcophagus. The tomb itself was filled with everything the deceased might need in the afterlife: furniture, food, jewelry, and even servants in the form of small figurines called ushabti. One of the most important rituals was the opening of the mouth ceremony. This involved touching various instruments to the mummy's mouth, symbolically restoring the deceased's ability to eat, drink, and speak in the afterlife. The ancient Egyptians also had a rather intense view of the afterlife journey. They believed that the deceased had to pass through a series of gates and caverns, facing various demons and obstacles. The ultimate test was the weighing of the heart against the feather of Maat, the goddess of truth and justice. If the heart was found to be lighter than the feather, the deceased was granted entry into the afterlife. If not, well, let's just say it involved being devoured by a fearsome creature called Ammit, part crocodile, part lion, and part hippopotamus. These elaborate rituals and beliefs show just how seriously the ancient Egyptians took death and the afterlife. It wasn't just an end, but a complex journey that required extensive preparation and a lifetime of good deeds. Now, as we leave the world of Egyptian death rituals behind, let's move on to our next topic. As we conclude our journey through ancient Egyptian life, it's clear that this civilization was far more complex and nuanced than we often imagine. From the grand pyramids to the humble homes of farmers, every aspect of their society was intricately woven into a tapestry of belief, duty, and survival. The lives of ordinary Egyptians were marked by hard work and devotion to their gods and pharaohs. While we often focus on the grandeur of royal tombs and temples, it was the daily toil of farmers, craftsmen, and laborers that truly built and sustained this remarkable civilization for over 3 millennia. Yet life in ancient Egypt wasn't without its challenges. The harsh desert climate, the ever-present threat of famine during poor harvests, and the rigid social hierarchy all contributed to a life that was often difficult and uncertain for the average Egyptian. Despite these hardships, the ancient Egyptians left an indelible mark on human history. Their innovations in agriculture, architecture, and medicine continue to influence our world today. The pyramids stand as enduring testaments to their ingenuity and determination, while their rich mythology and intricate hieroglyphs still captivate our imaginations. As we drift off to sleep, let's remember that the story of ancient Egypt is not just one of pharaohs and monuments, but of countless individuals whose daily lives and efforts shaped one of the most fascinating civilizations in human history. Their legacy reminds us that even in the face of adversity, human creativity and perseverance can achieve remarkable things. As we leave behind the squalid conditions of medieval peasant life, let's journey forward in time. Our next historical misery takes us to the crowded, disease-ridden streets of industrial revolution-era cities. Prepare yourself for a tale of smoke, grime, and urban despair. Now let's shift our focus from the toiling peasants to the shining knights of the medieval era. You might think these armored warriors had it made, living in castles and going on grand quests, but the reality of knighthood was far from the romantic tales we often hear. In fact, being a medieval knight came with its own set of challenges and hardships that might surprise you. From grueling training to the constant threat of violent death, let's explore why even the life of a knight wasn't all it was cracked up to be in the Middle Ages. While peasants toiled in the fields, knights were the glamorous warriors of medieval society. But becoming a knight was no easy feat. Let's delve into the grueling process of knight training. The journey to knighthood began at a young age, typically around 7 years old. Boys from noble families would be sent to serve as pages in the households of other lords or knights. This wasn't just a fancy babysitting arrangement, it was the first step in a long and arduous path. As pages, these young boys would learn the basics of etiquette, how to serve at table, and the fundamentals of horsemanship. They'd also begin their education in reading, writing, and music, skills considered essential for a well-rounded knight. Around the age of 14, if the page showed promise, he would be promoted to the rank of squire. This is where the real training began. Squires would shadow their assigned knights, learning the art of warfare, strategy, and the code of chivalry. Physical training was intense and relentless. Squires would spend hours each day practicing with weapons, often using wooden swords and shields that were deliberately made heavier than real ones to build strength and endurance. They'd also learn to ride in full armor, a skill that required incredible balance and strength. Imagine trying to mount a horse while wearing up to 100 pounds of metal. It's no wonder many knights needed small cranes to lift them onto their horses before battle. But it wasn't all about brute strength. Squires also had to master the intricacies of heraldry, learning to identify the coats of arms of various noble houses. This was crucial for recognizing allies and enemies on the battlefield. The code of chivalry was drilled into them daily. Honor, loyalty, and courage were not just lofty ideals, but expected behaviors. Squires were taught to protect the weak, respect women, at least those of noble birth, and remain faithful to the church. After years of training, usually around the age of 21, a squire might finally be deemed worthy of knighthood. The ceremony itself was a solemn affair, often preceded by a night of prayer and fasting. The squire would be dubbed a knight with a sword tap on each shoulder, symbolizing the weight of responsibility they were taking on. But even after achieving knighthood, the training never really ended. Knights were expected to continuously hone their skills through tournaments and real combat. The life of a knight was one of constant preparation for war, whether it came or not. Now let's turn our attention to one of the most iconic symbols of medieval warfare, knight armor. While we often romanticize the image of a gallant knight in shining armor, the reality was far less glamorous and much more cumbersome. Knight armor evolved significantly over the centuries, becoming increasingly complex and heavy. By the 15th century, a full suit of plate armor could weigh between 30 to 50 kilograms, or 66 to 110 pounds. Imagine carrying around a medium-sized dog everywhere you go, all while trying to fight in battle. The process of putting on this armor was no simple task. It required the assistance of at least one other person, often a squire, and could take up to an hour. This elaborate dressing ritual was known as arming the knight. The knight would first don a padded garment called an arming doublet, which provided cushioning under the metal plates. Next came the chain mail, followed by individual pieces of plate armor. These included greaves for the lower legs, cuisses for the thighs, a breastplate and backplate for the torso, vambraces for the arms, and gauntlets for the hands. The helmet or helm was typically the last piece to be put on. While this armor provided excellent protection against swords, arrows, and other medieval weapons, it came with significant drawbacks. The weight of the armor severely limited a knight's mobility and endurance. In battle, knights could quickly become exhausted, especially in hot weather. Contrary to popular belief, knights in full plate armor could mount and dismount horses, and even get up if knocked down. However, these actions required considerable effort and practice. The image of a knight being hoisted onto his horse with a crane is a myth, although mounting a horse in full armor was certainly no easy feat. Another misconception is that knight armor was unbearably hot. While it could certainly become uncomfortable, especially in direct sunlight, the layers of padding and the air gap between the knight's body and the metal plates provided some insulation. In fact, knights were often more at risk of hypothermia in cold, wet conditions than overheating. The cost of a full suit of plate armor was astronomical, often equivalent to the value of a small manor or several years' wages for a skilled craftsman. This high cost meant that only the wealthiest nobles or the most successful career soldiers could afford such protection. As firearms became more prevalent on the battlefield in the 16th and 17th centuries, the effectiveness of plate armor diminished. This led to its gradual decline, although certain elements persisted in military use well into the 19th century. So the next time you see a knight in shining armor in a movie or at a Renaissance fair, remember the reality behind the romanticism. A warrior encased in heavy, expensive, and often uncomfortable metal, demonstrating both the ingenuity and the limitations of medieval military technology. As we delve deeper into the medieval world, let's turn our attention to the iconic figures of the era, knights. While often romanticized in modern media, the reality of knight combat was far from glamorous. Knights were the elite warriors of medieval society, trained from childhood in the art of warfare. Their primary role was to serve as heavy cavalry, charging into battle atop powerful war horses. However, the life of a knight was not all chivalry and heroic deeds. The process of becoming a knight was long and arduous. Young boys, often as young as 7, would begin their training as pages, serving in a lord's household. By their early teens, they would become squires, assisting full-fledged knights and learning the intricacies of combat. Knight's armor, while offering protection, was incredibly heavy and cumbersome. A full suit of plate armor could weigh up to 50 kilograms, or about 110 pounds. Imagine trying to fight while carrying a small person on your back. The weight and limited visibility often led to exhaustion and overheating during battle. Contrary to popular belief, knights didn't spend all their time jousting in tournaments. Real combat was brutal and chaotic. In battle, knights would often dismount and fight on foot, wielding a variety of weapons such as longswords, maces, and polearms. The code of chivalry, while noble in theory, was often disregarded in the heat of battle. Knights were known to use dirty tactics, aiming for weak points in armor or targeting an opponent's horse to gain an advantage. The goal was survival, not fairness. One particularly gruesome aspect of knight combat was the use of specialized weapons designed to penetrate armor. The estoc, for example, was a long, narrow sword used to thrust into the gaps between armor plates. Another weapon, the warhammer, could deliver crushing blows that would cave in plate armor, along with the unfortunate wearer's body beneath. Injuries sustained in combat were often severe and difficult to treat with medieval medical knowledge. Infection was a constant threat, and many knights died not from their initial wounds, but from subsequent complications. The financial burden of being a knight was also significant. Knights were expected to provide their own equipment, including horses, armor, and weapons. This could cost a small fortune, equivalent to hundreds of thousands of dollars in today's currency. Many knights went into debt trying to maintain their status and equipment. In times of peace, knights often turned to tournaments as a way to hone their skills and earn money. However, these events were far from the romanticized versions we see in movies. They were dangerous affairs where serious injuries and even deaths were common occurrences. As warfare evolved and gunpowder weapons became more prevalent, the role of knights on the battlefield diminished. By the end of the medieval period, the age of the armored knight charging into battle was coming to a close, replaced by new military tactics and technologies. As we delve deeper into the medieval period, let's shift our focus to the daily life of knights, those armored warriors who have captured our imagination for centuries. While often romanticized in literature and film, the reality of a knight's existence was far from glamorous. Knights typically began their day at dawn, rising with the sun. Their first task was often to attend morning mass, as religious devotion was a crucial aspect of knightly life. After prayers, they would break their fast with a simple meal, usually consisting of bread, cheese, and perhaps some dried meat. Training was a constant part of a knight's routine. They would spend hours honing their skills in swordsmanship, horseback riding, and other martial arts. This rigorous practice was essential to maintain their fighting prowess and physical fitness. The weight of their armor and weapons meant that knights needed to be in peak condition to perform effectively in battle. When not engaged in combat or training, knights had various responsibilities to fulfill. They might oversee the management of their lord's estate, settle disputes among peasants, or participate in hunts. These activities were not merely leisure, but served important social and political functions within the feudal system. Maintaining their equipment was another time-consuming task. Knights would spend hours cleaning and repairing their armor, sharpening their weapons, and tending to their horses. This meticulous care was crucial, as the quality of their gear could mean the difference between life and death on the battlefield. Evenings often brought a chance for social interaction. Knights might gather in the great hall of a castle to dine, share stories, and engage in various forms of entertainment. These could include listening to minstrels, playing chess, or participating in friendly competitions of strength and skill. However, it's important to note that not all knights lived lives of luxury. Many were little more than well-armed servants, struggling to maintain their status and equipment. The cost of horses, armor, and weapons was substantial, and many knights found themselves in debt trying to keep up with the expectations of their rank. Sleep, when it came, was often brief and interrupted. Knights needed to be ready to respond to threats at a moment's notice, whether from external enemies or internal unrest. Their beds were typically simple, often just a straw mattress on a wooden frame, a far cry from the opulent chambers we might imagine. In times of war, a knight's life became even more demanding. Long campaigns meant months away from home, enduring harsh conditions, poor food, and the constant threat of violence. The romantic notion of chivalry often gave way to the brutal realities of medieval warfare. As we paint this picture of a knight's daily life, we see an existence filled with duty, discipline, and danger. Far from the shining heroes of legend, medieval knights were complex figures, balancing religious devotion, martial skill, and social obligations in a world that was often unforgiving and violent. As we delve deeper into the medieval world, let's explore a concept that has captivated imaginations for centuries: the Knight's Code of Chivalry. This romanticized set of rules and behaviors was meant to guide the conduct of knights, but like many aspects of medieval life, the reality was often far from the idealized version we see in stories and films. The concept of chivalry emerged around the 11th century, coinciding with the rise of knighthood as a distinct social class. It was a blend of military, religious, and courtly ideals that knights were expected to uphold. However, it's important to note that there was never a single, unified code of chivalry written down and universally followed. Instead, various writers and poets of the time contributed to the idea of chivalry through their works. One of the most influential was the 12th century writer Crétin de Troyes, who penned romantic tales of King Arthur and his knights. These stories popularized concepts like courtly love and knightly virtues, shaping the public perception of what a perfect knight should be. Some of the commonly cited virtues in the chivalric code included bravery, loyalty, generosity, and courtesy. Knights were expected to be protectors of the weak, defenders of the church, and paragons of moral virtue. They were to show mercy to their enemies, respect women, and always keep their word. But here's where it gets boring and a bit disappointing. The reality of knightly behavior often fell far short of these lofty ideals. Many knights were little more than well-armed thugs, using their position and strength to bully and exploit those beneath them. The concept of chivalry was often more about maintaining the social order and justifying the knight's elevated status than about genuine moral virtue. Take, for example, the idea of protecting the weak. While this sounds noble, it often translated to knights defending the interests of their lords or the church, rather than standing up for common people. The same knights who might show courtesy to a noblewoman would think nothing of pillaging a peasant village. Even the famous tournaments, often portrayed as grand displays of chivalry, were frequently violent affairs that could result in serious injury or death. These events were as much about showing off wealth and power as they were about demonstrating martial skill. The disconnect between the ideals of chivalry and the realities of knightly behavior became a source of criticism and satire. Writers like Geoffrey Chaucer in his Canterbury Tales often poked fun at the hypocrisies of knights who claimed to follow the chivalric code. So while the Knight's Code of Chivalry makes for exciting stories and romantic ideals, the boring truth is that it was often more myth than reality in medieval society. Like many aspects of history, the concept of chivalry was complex, contradictory, and far less glamorous than popular imagination would have us believe. As we conclude our exploration of the medieval knight, it's clear that their lives were far from the romanticized tales we often hear. While they enjoyed certain privileges and status, the reality of knighthood was fraught with danger, hardship, and moral complexities. Knights were expected to uphold a strict code of chivalry, balancing loyalty to their lord with the ideals of honor and virtue. However, this code often clashed with the brutal realities of medieval warfare and politics. Many knights found themselves torn between their sworn duties and their personal beliefs. The physical toll of knighthood was immense. Years of training and combat left lasting impacts on their bodies. Arthritis, chronic pain from old wounds, and the psychological scars of battle were common ailments among aging knights. The weight of their armor and the strain of wielding heavy weapons for hours on end led to numerous health issues. Moreover, the financial burden of maintaining their status was considerable. The cost of armor, weapons, horses, and retainers could easily bankrupt a knight who wasn't successful in tournaments or warfare. Many knights found themselves in debt, forced to seek out conflicts or engage in less honorable activities to maintain their lifestyle. In the end, the life of a medieval knight was a complex tapestry of glory and hardship, honor and brutality. While they may have been the elite warriors of their time, their existence was far from the fairy tale depictions we often imagine. As we drift off to sleep, let's remember that history is often more nuanced and challenging than it appears at first glance. As we leave behind the harsh realities of medieval peasant life, let's shift our focus to another equally challenging period in history. Our next topic will explore the grim circumstances faced by factory workers during the Industrial Revolution, a time of great change and often great suffering. As we drift through the mists of time, our journey takes us to the vast and ancient land of China, a civilization that stretches back thousands of years, with a history as rich and complex as the intricate patterns on its renowned porcelain. From the Great Wall snaking across mountainous landscapes to the serene gardens of the Forbidden City, China's past is a tapestry of emperors, inventions, and enduring tradition. But beyond the grandeur of imperial courts and philosophical teachings, what was life really like for the common people of ancient China? Let's unravel this tale of everyday existence in the Middle Kingdom. Moving eastward across the medieval world, let's explore the living conditions of peasants in ancient China. While the Chinese civilization was often more advanced than its European counterparts, life for the average peasant was still far from comfortable. In rural China, peasant homes were typically simple, single-story structures made of readily available materials. The most common building material was rammed earth, a technique where soil was compressed into sturdy walls. In some regions, peasants used a mixture of mud and straw to create adobe bricks, which were then sun-dried for durability. These homes, known as earth houses or chilu, were designed to be functional rather than luxurious. The average peasant dwelling consisted of just one or two rooms, with a central living area that doubled as a bedroom at night. Privacy was a luxury that most peasants couldn't afford. Roofs were typically thatched with straw or reeds, providing some protection from the elements but requiring frequent maintenance. During rainy seasons, leaks were a common problem, and peasants often had to contend with damp living conditions. Windows were a rarity in these humble abodes. Instead, small openings in the walls allowed for minimal ventilation and light. This made the interiors quite dark, and most activities had to be carried out by the dim light of oil lamps or candles. Heating and cooking were centered around a small hearth or stove, usually located in the main room. This kang, as it was called, was a raised platform made of brick or clay that could be heated from below. It served multiple purposes, as a cooking surface, a warm place to sleep, and the primary source of heat for the entire dwelling. Furniture was sparse and rudimentary. Most peasants slept on straw mats laid directly on the floor or on the kang. A few wooden stools or benches might be found, along with storage chests for the family's meager possessions. Sanitation was a significant issue. Most peasant homes lacked proper toilets or waste disposal systems. Instead, chamber pots were used and emptied into nearby fields, contributing to the spread of diseases and parasites. Water had to be fetched from nearby wells or streams, a daily chore that often fell to women and children. The concept of indoor plumbing was centuries away for these rural dwellers. Despite the hardships, Chinese peasants took pride in their homes, often decorating them with simple art or calligraphy during festivals. These modest dwellings, while far from comfortable by modern standards, provided shelter and a sense of belonging for countless generations of Chinese peasants throughout the medieval period. Moving on to medieval China, let's explore the diet of the average peasant during this period. While Chinese cuisine is renowned for its diversity and flavors today, the reality for peasants in medieval times was far less appetizing. Rice was the staple food for most Chinese peasants, particularly in the south where it was widely cultivated. In the north, where the climate was less suitable for rice cultivation, millet and wheat were more common. These grains formed the foundation of nearly every meal, providing the bulk of calories needed for their labor-intensive lives. Vegetables played a crucial role in the peasant diet, with common choices including soybeans, turnips, and various leafy greens. These were often grown in small household gardens or gathered from the wild. Preserved vegetables, such as pickles, were also important, helping to extend the availability of nutrients throughout the year. Meat was a rare luxury for most peasants. When available, it usually came in the form of pork, as pigs were relatively easy to raise and could be fed on household scraps. Chicken and eggs were also occasionally consumed, but far less frequently than we might imagine today. Fish and other aquatic creatures were more common in the diet, especially for those living near rivers, lakes, or coastal areas. Freshwater fish, shrimp, and even snails provided valuable protein to supplement the largely grain-based diet. Tea, which we often associate with Chinese culture, was indeed consumed during this period. However, for peasants, it was often a simple, unadorned beverage rather than the refined drink enjoyed by the upper classes. One of the most significant challenges faced by medieval Chinese peasants was the constant threat of famine. Poor harvests, natural disasters, or political upheaval could quickly lead to widespread food shortages. During these times, peasants might resort to eating tree bark, wild plants, or even clay to stave off hunger. The monotony of the peasant diet was occasionally broken by seasonal festivals and celebrations. During these times, special foods might be prepared, and even poorer families would try to include some meat or sweeter dishes in their meals. It's worth noting that despite its limitations, the medieval Chinese peasant diet was often more varied and nutritionally balanced than that of their European counterparts. The inclusion of soybeans, for instance, provided a valuable source of protein that was less common in Western diets of the time. However, let's not romanticize this lifestyle. The constant struggle for sustenance, the lack of variety, and the ever-present risk of malnutrition or starvation made the life of a medieval Chinese peasant far from enviable. Their diet, while functional, was a far cry from the diverse and flavorful Chinese cuisine we know today. As we delve into the world of ancient Chinese medicine, we find a fascinating blend of philosophy, observation, and tradition that has endured for thousands of years. While some practices may seem unusual to modern eyes, they were groundbreaking for their time. Chinese medicine began to take shape around 2000 BCE during the reign of the legendary Yellow Emperor. The foundational text, the Yellow Emperor's Inner Canon, compiled around 200 BCE, laid out the principles that would guide Chinese medical practice for millennia. At the core of Chinese medicine is the concept of qi, or life force. This energy was believed to flow through the body along pathways called meridians. Health was seen as a balance of yin and yang forces, and illness resulted from disruptions in this delicate equilibrium. One of the most recognizable practices in Chinese medicine is acupuncture. Practitioners would insert thin needles into specific points along the meridians to restore the flow of qi. While it might sound painful, many patients reported feeling relaxed during and after treatments. Herbal medicine was another cornerstone of Chinese healing. Practitioners would prescribe complex formulas using hundreds of different plant, animal, and mineral substances. These concoctions were often brewed into teas or taken as powders. Moxibustion, a lesser-known technique, involved burning dried mugwort on or near the skin. This was believed to warm the body and promote healing. It was often used in conjunction with acupuncture. Chinese doctors also placed great importance on diet and lifestyle. They believed that certain foods had heating or cooling properties and could be used to treat imbalances in the body. Exercise, particularly in the form of Tai Chi and Qigong, was prescribed to maintain health and longevity. Diagnosis in Chinese medicine was a holistic affair. Doctors would observe the patient's tongue, feel their pulse, and ask detailed questions about their lifestyle and symptoms. They believed that the body's external signs reflected internal conditions. While some of these practices may seem strange to us now, it's worth noting that Chinese medicine made several important contributions to global healthcare. For instance, the use of ephedra for respiratory issues and artemisinin for malaria both have roots in traditional Chinese remedies. As we drift off to sleep, let's appreciate the rich history and enduring influence of Chinese medicine, a testament to human ingenuity in the face of illness and the quest for well-being. As we drift through the annals of history, let's turn our attention to the intricate world of Chinese bureaucracy. In ancient China, the path to power and influence often led through a labyrinth of examinations and administrative roles. The imperial examination system, known as the Keju, was established during the Sui dynasty in 605 CE and persisted for over 1,300 years. This system was designed to select the most capable individuals for government positions, regardless of their social status or family background. Aspiring bureaucrats would spend years, sometimes decades, preparing for these grueling tests. The exams covered a wide range of subjects, including literature, philosophy, and the Confucian classics. Candidates were expected to memorize vast amounts of text and demonstrate their mastery through essay writing and poetry composition. The examination process was notoriously difficult and highly competitive. Imagine spending days locked in a small examination cell, writing until your hands cramp, all in the hopes of securing a coveted government position. Many candidates attempted the exams multiple times throughout their lives, with some continuing well into old age. Success in these exams could lead to appointments as local magistrates, provincial governors, or even high-ranking ministers in the imperial court. However, the journey didn't end with passing the exam. Once in office, bureaucrats faced a complex hierarchy and a web of protocols that governed every aspect of their professional lives. The Chinese bureaucratic system was highly centralized, with the emperor at its apex. Below him were the 3 departments and 6 ministries, each responsible for different aspects of government administration. Bureaucrats had to navigate this intricate structure, balancing their duties to the state with the ever-present risk of political intrigue and factional conflicts. One particularly tedious aspect of Chinese bureaucracy was the emphasis on detailed record-keeping and report writing. Officials were required to document every decision, transaction, and event within their jurisdiction. These reports would then be sent up the chain of command, often passing through multiple levels of review before reaching the appropriate authorities. The sheer volume of paperwork generated by this system was staggering. Imagine entire buildings filled with scrolls and documents, meticulously cataloged and stored for future reference. It's no wonder that the term red tape originated from the red ribbon used to bind official documents in many bureaucracies, including China's. While the Chinese bureaucratic system aimed to ensure efficient governance and meritocracy, it also had its drawbacks. The rigid adherence to precedent and protocol often led to a slow pace of change and innovation. Bureaucrats were sometimes more concerned with following proper procedures than addressing the actual needs of the people they govern. As we ponder the intricacies of Chinese bureaucracy, let the monotony of administrative details lull you into a peaceful slumber. Rest assured that while you sleep, the wheels of bureaucracy continue to turn, much as they have for centuries. As we drift through the annals of history, let's turn our attention to the remarkable inventions that emerged from ancient China. These innovations, while groundbreaking, often took centuries to reach the Western world, leaving many to ponder the slow pace of technological diffusion in medieval times. One of the most significant Chinese inventions was paper, developed around 105 CE by Kai Lun, an official of the Han Dynasty. This revolutionary material, made from mulberry bark, rags, and other plant fibers, would eventually replace cumbersome clay tablets and expensive silk as the primary medium for writing and record-keeping. Another Chinese innovation that dramatically changed the world was gunpowder. Discovered accidentally by alchemists seeking an elixir of immortality in the 9th century, gunpowder would go on to revolutionize warfare and mining. However, it took several centuries for this explosive invention to make its way to Europe. The compass, essential for navigation, was also a Chinese creation. Initially used for divination and feng shui in the Han Dynasty, it wasn't until the 11th century that the compass was adapted for maritime use. This invention would prove crucial for the later age of exploration, enabling long sea voyages and the mapping of new territories. Porcelain, often called China in the West, was perfected by Chinese artisans during the Tang Dynasty. This fine, translucent ceramic was highly prized for its beauty and durability, becoming a major export along the Silk Road. European attempts to replicate porcelain wouldn't succeed until the early 18th century. The mechanical clock, another Chinese invention, was created by the Buddhist monk Yi Exing in 725 CE. This water-powered device marked a significant advancement in timekeeping, though it would take centuries for mechanical clocks to become widespread in Europe. Tea, now a global beverage, originated in China as a medicinal drink. Legend attributes its discovery to Emperor Shennong in 2737 BCE. The practice of tea drinking slowly spread along trade routes, reaching Europe in the 17th century and becoming particularly popular in Britain. Lastly, let's not forget the invention of silk production. The origins of sericulture date back to around 3000 BCE in China. The secret of silk making was closely guarded for millennia, with harsh punishments for those who attempted to smuggle silkworms or eggs out of the country. These inventions, among many others, showcase the ingenuity of ancient Chinese civilization. Yet the slow spread of these technologies to other parts of the world highlights the limited nature of global communication and trade in medieval times, a stark contrast to our modern era of rapid technological diffusion. As we conclude our journey through ancient China, it's clear that life for the average person was far from glamorous. The rigid social hierarchy, harsh punishments, and constant threat of invasion made everyday existence a challenge. Despite these hardships, the ancient Chinese civilization made remarkable advancements in technology, philosophy, and the arts. Inventions like paper, gunpowder, and the compass would go on to shape the course of human history. However, it's crucial to remember that these achievements came at a great cost to the common people. The construction of massive projects like the Great Wall required immense labor, often forced upon the lower classes. The legacy of ancient China's social structure can still be felt today, with echoes of Confucian philosophy influencing modern Chinese society. While much has changed, the struggles of the past serve as a reminder of how far we've come. As we drift off to sleep, let's appreciate the comforts of our modern lives, free from the constant fear of barbarian invasions or the whims of tyrannical emperors. Our pillows are certainly more comfortable than the wooden blocks used by ancient Chinese peasants. In our next segment, we'll explore another fascinating period of history where life was equally challenging for the common folk. But for now, let the monotony of ancient Chinese peasant life lull you into a peaceful slumber. As we conclude our exploration of medieval peasant life, let's shift our focus to another equally dreary aspect of history. Prepare yourself for a journey into the monotonous world of ancient bureaucracy, where endless paperwork and mind-numbing regulations ruled supreme in civilizations long past. As we delve deeper into the annals of medieval history, let's turn our attention to the imposing stone fortresses that dotted the landscape, castles. These architectural marvels were not just defensive structures, but entire self-contained communities. From the lofty towers to the dank dungeons, castles were microcosms of medieval society. In the coming segments, we'll explore the daily lives of those who called these stone behemoths home, from the lowliest servant to the lord of the manor. Prepare to uncover the often overlooked realities of castle life in the Middle Ages. As we continue our journey through the monotonous life of medieval times, let's turn our attention to the imposing structures that dominated the landscape, castles. These massive stone fortifications were not just homes for the nobility, but also served as centers of local government and military strongholds. Castle architecture evolved significantly over the centuries, adapting to changing warfare techniques and societal needs. Early castles, known as motte and bailey castles, were simple wooden structures built on raised earthworks. However, as time passed, stone became the preferred building material due to its durability and fire resistance. The basic layout of a medieval castle typically included several key features. At the heart of the castle stood the keep, a fortified tower that served as the last line of defense and living quarters for the lord and his family. Surrounding the keep were thick, high walls with crenellations, those distinctive notched parapets that allowed defenders to shoot arrows while remaining protected. Castles often featured a gatehouse, which was more than just an entrance. It was a complex defensive structure with multiple gates, portcullises, and murder holes, openings through which defenders could pour boiling oil or drop heavy objects on attackers. Some castles even had moats, wide water-filled ditches that provided an additional obstacle for would-be invaders. Inside the castle walls, you'd find a bustling community. The inner bailey or courtyard housed various buildings such as stables, workshops, and storage facilities. The Great Hall was the social center of castle life, where feasts were held and the lord conducted business. Kitchens, usually separate from the main building to reduce fire risk, were constantly busy preparing meals for the castle's inhabitants. As siege warfare techniques advanced, castle designs became increasingly sophisticated. Concentric castles with multiple layers of walls became popular in the later medieval period. These castles were virtually impregnable, designed to exhaust and demoralize attackers long before they could reach the inner defenses. Despite their impressive appearance, life inside a castle was far from comfortable by modern standards. Stone walls retained cold and dampness, making winters particularly harsh. Sanitation was rudimentary at best, with guardrobes essentially holes in the walls that emptied into the moat or castle ditch, serving as toilets. The constant noise, lack of privacy, and ever-present threat of attack made castle life a far cry from the romantic notions often portrayed in popular media. As we drift off to sleep, imagine the echoing footsteps of guards patrolling the ramparts, the flickering torchlight casting long shadows across cold stone walls, and the weight of history pressing down on these ancient fortifications. The castles that once dominated medieval landscapes now stand as silent sentinels, reminding us of a time when thick walls and high towers were the pinnacle of security and power. As we delve deeper into the world of medieval castles, let's explore the intricate systems of defense that made these fortresses so formidable. Castle defense was a complex art, combining architecture, strategy, and sheer intimidation to keep invaders at bay. The first line of defense was often the castle's location itself. Builders chose sites that were naturally difficult to approach, such as hilltops, islands, or areas surrounded by steep cliffs. This geographical advantage made it challenging for enemies to even reach the castle walls. Speaking of walls, these weren't just simple stone barriers. Castle walls were thick, sometimes up to 12 feet wide, and could reach heights of 40 feet or more. They were often built with a slight inward slope to make scaling them even more difficult. Atop these walls, crenellations provided cover for defenders while allowing them to fire arrows or drop objects on attackers below. Gatehouses were another crucial element of castle defense. Far from being simple entry points, they were fortified structures in their own right. Multiple gates, portcullises, heavy iron grates that could be dropped quickly, and murder holes openings in the ceiling for dropping objects on intruders made breaching a gatehouse a daunting task. Moats, those water-filled ditches surrounding castles, weren't just for show. They created an additional obstacle for attackers and prevented them from undermining the castle walls. Some castles even had drawbridges that could be raised, further isolating the fortress from potential invaders. Inside the castle, the layout was designed with defense in mind. The keep, or central tower, was typically the strongest and most secure part of the castle. It served as a last line of defense if outer walls were breached. Spiral staircases within the castle were often built to curve clockwise, giving right-handed defenders an advantage over ascending attackers. Castles also employed various defensive features like machicolations, overhanging structures with holes in the floor for dropping objects on enemies below. Arrow loops, narrow vertical slits in the walls, allowed archers to fire arrows while remaining protected. During sieges, castles relied on their ability to outlast attackers. Large storerooms filled with preserved food and deep wells ensured that defenders could hold out for extended periods. Some castles even had secret escape tunnels, allowing inhabitants to flee or bring in supplies if needed. As siege weapons like trebuchets became more advanced, castle designs evolved to counter these threats. Rounded towers replaced square ones as they were better at deflecting projectiles. Walls became thicker and more reinforced to withstand bombardment. The psychological aspect of castle defense shouldn't be underestimated either. The imposing sight of a massive stone fortress, bristling with defenses, was often enough to deter potential attackers. The reputation of a well-defended castle could be as effective as its physical defenses in maintaining peace and order in the surrounding lands. As we continue our journey through the monotonous lives of medieval peasants, let's shift our gaze to the looming stone structures that dominated the landscape, castles. While these fortresses may seem grand and exciting to us now, the daily life within their walls was far from glamorous for most inhabitants. Castle life was a stark contrast between the nobility and the servants. While lords and ladies enjoyed relative comfort, the majority of castle dwellers led lives of endless toil and drudgery. Let's explore the tedious routines that made up a typical day within these stone walls. Dawn broke early for the castle's servants. As the first rays of sunlight pierced through narrow windows, the kitchen staff was already hard at work. Fires had to be lit, water fetched from wells, and bread dough prepared for baking. The monotonous task of grinding grain into flour was a constant, mind-numbing activity that filled the air with dust and the sound of grinding stones. Meanwhile, stable hands tended to the horses, mucking out stalls and replenishing feed. The smell of manure and hay permeated the air, a constant reminder of their lowly status. Laundresses began their day by lugging heavy baskets of linens and clothing to be washed, a task that would occupy them until dusk. As the day progressed, the castle buzzed with repetitive activities. Maids scurried through corridors, dusting and sweeping endlessly. The monotony of their work was broken only by the occasional bark of an order from a superior or the distant clang of weapons from the practice yard. In the great hall, pages and squires stood for hours, waiting to serve their lords and ladies. Their feet ached and their minds wandered, but they dared not show any sign of fatigue or boredom. The strict hierarchy of castle life meant that even the slightest misstep could result in harsh punishment. As evening approached, the kitchen once again became a flurry of activity. Meals had to be prepared, served, and cleared away, a process that could take hours for larger gatherings. The scullery maids faced the unenviable task of scrubbing pots and dishes late into the night, their hands raw from the harsh soaps and cold water. When darkness fell, the castle didn't truly sleep. Guards patrolled the walls in shifts, their footsteps a constant reminder of the world beyond the stone barriers. For many servants, sleep was a luxury afforded in short bursts, often on hard pallets in crowded, drafty rooms. This cycle of monotony repeated day after day, season after season. While the lords and ladies might have enjoyed feasts, hunts, and other diversions, the vast majority of castle inhabitants lived lives of unrelenting routine and labor. The grandeur of castle life, it seems, was reserved for a select few, while the rest toiled in the shadows of those imposing walls. While peasants struggled with meager meals, life in medieval castles was a different story altogether. Let's take a moment to explore the lavish feasts that took place within those stone walls. Castle feasts were extravagant affairs, often lasting for hours and featuring an abundance of food that would make a peasant's jaw drop. These events were not just about satisfying hunger, they were grand displays of wealth, power, and hospitality. The feast would begin with a ceremonial hand-washing, as servants poured scented water over the guests' hands. This wasn't just for cleanliness, it was a ritual that marked the start of the meal and showcased the host's attention to detail. As diners took their seats at long wooden tables, they would find themselves surrounded by an array of exotic dishes. Roasted peacocks, adorned with their colorful feathers, were often the centerpiece. These birds were more for show than taste, symbolizing the host's ability to procure rare and expensive items. Other popular dishes included wild boar, venison, and various types of fowl. Fish was also common, especially on religious fast days when meat was forbidden. The wealthy could afford imported delicacies like almonds, sugar, and spices from far-off lands. Between courses, servants would bring out subtleties, elaborate sugar sculptures shaped like castles, ships, or mythical creatures. These edible art pieces were meant to impress and entertain the guests. The feast was not just about food, but also about entertainment. Minstrels would play music, jesters would perform tricks, and storytellers would regale the audience with tales of adventure and romance. Wine and ale flowed freely throughout the meal, often served in ornate goblets. The quality and variety of drinks were another way for hosts to showcase their wealth and connections. While the lords and ladies enjoyed their feast upstairs, the kitchen staff below worked tirelessly to prepare and serve each course. The heat from the massive fireplaces, the chaos of coordinating multiple dishes, and the pressure to impress made their job incredibly demanding. These feasts were not everyday occurrences, even for the wealthy. They were reserved for special occasions like weddings, coronations, or visits from important guests. The extravagance of these events stood in stark contrast to the daily lives of peasants, highlighting the vast inequality of medieval society. As we continue our journey through the dreary lives of medieval folk, let's turn our attention to those who served within the imposing stone walls of castles. While not quite as downtrodden as the peasants toiling in the fields, castle servants faced their own unique set of challenges and hardships. Castle servants occupied a peculiar position in medieval society. They were neither nobility nor common peasants, existing in a sort of social limbo. Their lives revolved entirely around the needs and whims of their noble masters, with little time or freedom for personal pursuits. The hierarchy within castle service was strict and unforgiving. At the bottom were the scullions, tasked with the most menial and unpleasant duties. These unfortunate souls spent their days scrubbing pots, cleaning fireplaces, and disposing of waste. The work was backbreaking, and the conditions were often unsanitary and dangerous. Moving up the ladder, we find chamber servants responsible for maintaining the private quarters of the nobility. While their work might seem less physically demanding, it came with its own set of pressures. These servants had to anticipate their master's needs, maintain absolute discretion, and endure the occasional outburst of noble temper. The kitchen staff faced a different kind of challenge. Preparing elaborate meals for the castle's inhabitants was a constant race against time. Cooks and their assistants worked in sweltering conditions, surrounded by open fires and sharp implements. Burns, cuts, and heat exhaustion were commonplace occupational hazards. Perhaps the most enviable position among castle servants was that of the steward. This individual oversaw the day-to-day operations of the castle, managing other servants and handling finances. However, with great responsibility came great stress. A steward's failure could result in severe punishment or dismissal, leaving them without means in a world that offered few alternatives. It's worth noting that for many, becoming a castle servant was actually a step up from the life of a peasant. The work, while demanding, usually provided more reliable food and shelter. Some servants even received basic education, learning to read and write as part of their duties. However, this relative improvement came at a cost. Castle servants had little to no personal freedom. Their lives were not their own, with every waking moment dedicated to serving their masters. Privacy was a foreign concept, as servants often shared cramped living quarters and were expected to be available at all hours. The nature of their work also exposed castle servants to unique dangers. Those serving in border castles or during times of conflict risked injury or death during sieges. Even in peacetime, accidents were common in the hazardous environment of a medieval castle, with its narrow staircases, dark corridors, and precarious battlements. As we conclude our journey through the grim realities of medieval castle life, it's clear that the romanticized notions we often hold about this era are far from the truth. The stark contrast between the nobility and the common folk was not just a matter of wealth, but of basic human dignity and survival. From the squalid living conditions in the lower Bailey to the constant threat of violence and disease, life for the majority was a daily struggle. The feudal system, while providing some semblance of order, essentially trapped most people in a cycle of poverty and servitude that was nearly impossible to escape. Yet it's important to remember that even in these harsh conditions, people found ways to persevere. Communities formed, traditions were born, and the seeds of future societal changes were slowly planted. The resilience of the human spirit shone through, even in the darkest corners of these stone fortresses. As we drift off to sleep, let's be grateful for the progress we've made since those challenging times. The comforts we enjoy today, clean water, sanitation, personal freedoms, are luxuries that even the wealthiest medieval lord could scarcely imagine. While our modern world is far from perfect, our nightly rest is undoubtedly more peaceful than that of our medieval ancestors. As we conclude our exploration of medieval peasant life, let's shift our focus to another equally dreary aspect of history. Prepare to drift further into slumber as we delve into the monotonous world of early modern factory work, where the drudgery of agrarian life gave way to the tedium of industrial labor. As we journey through the annals of history, let's turn our attention to the fascinating world of the ancient Aztecs. This Mesoamerican civilization, known for its complex society and rich cultural traditions, flourished in central Mexico from the 14th to the 16th centuries. In the next few minutes, we'll explore some of the less discussed aspects of Aztec life that might surprise you. From their unique agricultural practices to their intricate social hierarchies, prepare to delve into the everyday realities of this remarkable civilization. As we drift through the annals of history, let's journey to the heart of the Aztec Empire, where city life was a vibrant tapestry of culture, commerce, and strict social hierarchy. Imagine yourself walking through the bustling streets of Tenochtitlan, the capital city built on an island in Lake Texcoco. The air is thick with the scent of copal incense and the chatter of Nahuatl, the language of the Aztecs. Everywhere you look, there's activity. Merchants hawk their wares in the sprawling marketplace, their voices rising above the crowd. Colorful fabrics, exotic feathers, and gleaming obsidian blades catch your eye as you wander past. But life in an Aztec city wasn't all commerce and excitement. The social structure was rigid and unforgiving. At the top of the pyramid, quite literally, were the nobility and priests. They lived in grand palaces and enjoyed privileges beyond the dreams of common folk. Below them were the merchants, artisans, and warriors, each playing a crucial role in society. And at the bottom, the Maisualtin, or commoners. These were the farmers, laborers, and servants who kept the city running. Their lives were far from easy. They lived in simple adobe houses, often crowded together in densely packed neighborhoods. Their days were filled with hard work and the constant pressure to pay tribute to their social superiors. Education was a luxury reserved primarily for the elite. While noble children attended schools to learn history, religion, and warfare, commoner children typically learned their parents' trade. However, the Aztecs did have a form of universal education, teaching basic moral principles and social expectations to all young people. Religion permeated every aspect of Aztec urban life. Massive temple pyramids dominated the skyline, and religious festivals punctuated the calendar. These events were both celebration and grim reminder of the gods' power, often culminating in human sacrifices that were believed to keep the cosmic order in balance. Health and hygiene in Aztec cities were surprisingly advanced for their time. Tenochtitlan had complex systems of aqueducts and waste management. Public baths were common, and personal cleanliness was highly valued. The Aztecs even had a robust understanding of herbal medicine, with dedicated healers treating a variety of ailments. Yet for all its advancements, life in an Aztec city was precarious. Natural disasters, crop failures, or military defeats could quickly turn abundance into scarcity. The threat of being chosen as a sacrificial victim loomed over many, especially captives and slaves. As we leave the streets of Tenochtitlan behind, remember that while Aztec city life had its moments of splendor and achievement, it was also marked by stark inequality and the constant shadow of their demanding gods. The rise and fall of this remarkable civilization serves as a testament to the complex tapestry of human society throughout history. As we delve into the agricultural practices of the Aztec civilization, we find a complex system that sustained one of the most powerful empires in Mesoamerica. The Aztecs, who flourished in central Mexico from the 14th to the 16th centuries, developed innovative farming techniques to overcome the challenges of their environment. At the heart of Aztec agriculture was the Chinampa system, often referred to as floating gardens. These were artificial islands created in the shallow lakes surrounding Tenochtitlan, the Aztec capital. Chinampas were constructed by piling up layers of vegetation, mud, and lake sediment to create raised fields. These ingenious structures allowed the Aztecs to expand their arable land and maximize crop yields. The surrounding water provided natural irrigation and deposited nutrient-rich silt, making the Chinampas incredibly fertile. This system enabled the Aztecs to harvest up to 7 crops per year, a remarkable feat for any agricultural society. The primary crops cultivated by the Aztecs included maize, beans, and squash, a combination known as the Three Sisters. These plants were often grown together, as they complemented each other both nutritionally and agriculturally. Maize provided support for climbing bean vines, while squash spread along the ground, suppressing weeds and retaining soil moisture. In addition to these staples, Aztec farmers grew a variety of other crops such as tomatoes, chili peppers, sweet potatoes, and amaranth. They also cultivated non-food crops like cotton and tobacco. The diversity of their agricultural output contributed to a rich and varied diet, as well as providing materials for clothing and trade. The Aztecs also practiced terrace farming on hillsides, constructing stone walls to create level planting areas. This technique allowed them to maximize land use in mountainous regions and prevent soil erosion. They implemented sophisticated irrigation systems, including aqueducts and reservoirs, to ensure a steady water supply for their crops. Aztec farmers used various tools in their agricultural practices. The koa, a wooden stick with a blade attached to one end, was used for planting and weeding. They also employed digging sticks and hoes made from wood and stone. These simple yet effective tools, combined with their advanced farming techniques, allowed the Aztecs to achieve remarkable agricultural productivity. The success of Aztec agriculture was not just due to their innovative techniques, but also their deep understanding of natural cycles and climate patterns. They developed a complex calendar system that guided their planting and harvesting schedules, ensuring optimal crop yields throughout the year. As we delve into the intricacies of Aztec religion, prepare yourself for a journey into a world of complex deities, blood-soaked rituals, and a cosmic struggle that shaped the lives of an entire civilization. The Aztecs, who flourished in central Mexico from the 14th to the 16th centuries, had a rich and intricate religious system that permeated every aspect of their society. At the heart of Aztec religion was a pantheon of gods and goddesses, each with their own domains and responsibilities. The supreme deity was Omteotl, a dual god representing both male and female aspects who was believed to have created the universe. However, it was Huitzilopochtli, the god of war and the sun, who held a special place in Aztec worship. The Aztecs believed that Huitzilopochtli needed constant nourishment in the form of human blood to continue his daily journey across the sky, ensuring the continuation of the world. This belief led to one of the most infamous aspects of Aztec religion, human sacrifice. The practice was not merely a display of brutality, but a sacred duty believed to be necessary for the survival of the universe. Prisoners of war, slaves, and even volunteers were offered to the gods in elaborate ceremonies atop grand pyramids. The most common method involved the victim being stretched across a stone altar, where a priest would use an obsidian knife to cut open the chest and remove the still-beating heart. But Aztec religion wasn't solely focused on bloodshed. It also encompassed a complex calendar system that guided both religious and agricultural activities. The Aztec calendar consisted of a 52-year cycle, combining a 365-day solar calendar with a 260-day ritual calendar. This system determined the timing of festivals, planting seasons, and even personal fortune-telling. The Aztecs believed in multiple afterlives, each designated for different types of deaths. Warriors who died in battle or sacrifice were thought to accompany the sun on its daily journey, while those who died from water-related causes were believed to go to Tlalocan, a paradise ruled by the rain god Tlaloc. The concept of cosmic cycles was also central to Aztec belief, with the idea that the world had been created and destroyed multiple times before the current era. Interestingly, despite the seemingly harsh nature of their religious practices, the Aztecs also had a profound appreciation for poetry, philosophy, and the arts. Many of their religious concepts were explored through intricate metaphors and flowery language, reflecting a deep contemplation of existence and the nature of reality. As we conclude this segment on Aztec religion, it's important to remember that while some aspects may seem shocking to modern sensibilities, it was a complex system that provided meaning, structure, and cosmic significance to the lives of millions of people for centuries. The Aztec worldview, with its blend of cosmic drama, earthly duties, and philosophical depth, continues to fascinate scholars and capture the imagination of people around the world to this day. As we drift further into our historical slumber, let's turn our attention to the Aztec civilization and their approach to warfare. The Aztecs, who flourished in central Mexico from the 14th to the 16th centuries, had a complex and ritualistic approach to combat that might just lull you into a peaceful sleep. Aztec warfare was deeply intertwined with their religious beliefs and social structure. Unlike many other civilizations, the primary goal of Aztec battles wasn't necessarily to kill enemies or conquer territory. Instead, their main objective was to capture enemy warriors alive for use in religious sacrifices. This practice, known as flower wars or Xochitl, was seen as a way to appease the gods and ensure the continuation of the world. The Aztec military was highly organized and stratified. At the bottom were the commoners, who formed the bulk of the army. These soldiers were organized into units of about 8,000 men, each led by an experienced warrior. Above them were the elite warrior societies, such as the Eagle and Jaguar warriors, who were easily recognizable by their elaborate costumes designed to intimidate enemies. Aztec weapons were relatively simple but effective. The macuahuitl, a wooden club embedded with obsidian blades, was a fearsome close combat weapon. They also used atlatls, a type of spear thrower that could launch darts with incredible force and accuracy. Shields made from wood and leather, often adorned with feathers, provided protection. Before a battle, Aztec warriors would engage in various rituals and preparations. They would fast, pray, and make offerings to the gods. Some would even engage in ritualistic bloodletting, piercing their earlobes or tongues to offer their own blood to the deities. This spiritual preparation was considered just as important as physical training. When the battle began, the Aztecs would attempt to intimidate their enemies with loud war cries and the blowing of conch shell trumpets. Their tactics often involved trying to break enemy lines and isolate individual warriors for capture. Success in battle was measured not by how many enemies were killed, but but by how many were captured for later sacrifice. After a successful battle, captured warriors would be brought back to Tenochtitlan, the Aztec capital. Here, they would be sacrificed in elaborate ceremonies atop the Great Pyramid temples. The Aztecs believed that these sacrifices were necessary to keep the sun moving across the sky and prevent the end of the world. This unique approach to warfare ultimately contributed to the downfall of the Aztec Empire. When the Spanish conquistadors arrived in the early 16th century, they exploited the resentment of neighboring tribes who had long been victims of Aztec raids. The Spanish' goal of conquest and their unfamiliar tactics caught the Aztecs off guard, leading to the rapid collapse of their empire. As we delve into the world of Aztec medicine, prepare yourself for a journey that's equal parts fascinating and unsettling. The Aztecs, known for their advanced civilization, had a unique approach to healing that might make you grateful for modern healthcare. Aztec medicine was a blend of religious beliefs, herbal remedies, and what we might generously call experimental practices. At the heart of their medical philosophy was the concept of balance between hot and cold energies in the body. Illness was seen as a disruption of this balance, often attributed to angering the gods or evil spirits. One of the most common Aztec medical treatments was the use of herbal remedies. They had an extensive knowledge of local plants and their medicinal properties. For instance, they used marigold flowers to treat stomach ailments and agave sap for wound healing. Some of these remedies were surprisingly effective and are still used in traditional medicine today. However, not all Aztec medical practices were so benign. For more severe illnesses or injuries, treatments could get intense. Take, for example, their approach to treating a headache. The Aztec healer might make small cuts on the patient's temples and suck out blood, believing this would relieve pressure and pain. If you thought modern migraines were bad, imagine this as your go-to remedy. Surgeries were performed using obsidian blades, which were incredibly sharp but also prone to shattering. Aztec surgeons were skilled at setting broken bones and even performed basic cranial surgeries. However, without anesthesia or proper sterilization, these procedures were excruciatingly painful and often led to infections. Perhaps the most infamous aspect of Aztec medicine was the use of human sacrifices to appease the gods and prevent widespread illness. They believed that blood offerings were necessary to keep the sun moving across the sky and maintain cosmic balance. While this practice was more religious than medical, it shows how intertwined health and spirituality were in Aztec culture. Despite some of these gruesome practices, Aztec medicine wasn't all bad. They maintained a high standard of personal hygiene, which was quite advanced for their time. Regular bathing, dental care, and even the use of steam baths were common practices that contributed to overall health. In the end, Aztec medicine was a complex system that reflected their understanding of the world. While some practices might make us cringe today, others laid the groundwork for future medical advancements. So the next time you pop a painkiller for a headache, you might want to spare a thought for your Aztec ancestors and their, shall we say, more hands-on approach to healthcare. As we conclude our journey through the ancient Aztec civilization, we're left with a complex tapestry of achievements and brutalities. The Aztecs were undoubtedly one of the most fascinating cultures in Mesoamerica, leaving an indelible mark on history. Their architectural marvels, like the great city of Tenochtitlan, showcased their engineering prowess. The sophisticated calendar system and agricultural techniques demonstrated their scientific understanding, and their intricate artwork continues to captivate us to this day. However, we cannot ignore the darker aspects of their society. The practice of human sacrifice, while deeply rooted in their religious beliefs, remains a disturbing element of their culture. The strict social hierarchy and the brutality of their military conquests paint a picture of a society built on fear and oppression. Yet it's crucial to remember that judging ancient civilizations by modern standards can be problematic. The Aztecs, like many societies throughout history, were a product of their time and circumstances. Their eventual downfall at the hands of Spanish conquistadors marked the end of an era, but not the end of their influence. Today, elements of Aztec culture persist in modern Mexico and beyond, a testament to the enduring legacy of this remarkable civilization. As we drift off to sleep, let's ponder the complexities of human societies, both ancient and modern, and the lessons we can learn from studying our shared history. As we leave behind the harsh realities of medieval peasant life, let's shift our focus to another equally challenging period in history. We'll now explore the often overlooked struggles of early industrial workers, whose lives were far from the romanticized tales of progress we often hear. Now let's turn our attention to another fascinating aspect of medieval life, the monastery. These religious institutions played a crucial role in shaping the society and culture of the Middle Ages. Monasteries were not just places of prayer and contemplation, but also centers of learning, art, and agriculture. They preserved knowledge through the Dark Ages and acted as hospitals, schools, and even breweries. As we delve into the world of medieval monasteries, prepare to discover how these cloistered communities influenced the course of history in ways that might surprise you. As we drift through the mists of medieval time, let's peek into the daily routine of a monastery, where the rhythms of prayer and work shaped every waking moment. The day began early, very early. Long before the sun peeked over the horizon, the monastery bells would toll, rousing the monks from their slumber. This first call, known as the night office or vigils, came around 2 a.m. Jan imagined being woken at such an ungodly hour every single day. The monks would groggily make their way to the church, where they would spend the next few hours in prayer and contemplation. As the first light of dawn broke, it was time for lauds, another prayer service. By now, the monks had been awake for hours, their minds focused on spiritual matters while most of the world still slumbered. Following lauds, the monks would gather for a chapter meeting. Here, they would discuss monastery business, assign daily tasks, and sometimes confess their sins to the group. It was a time for community and accountability. The day continued with more prayer services interspersed with periods of work. Monks engaged in various tasks depending on their skills and the needs of the monastery. Some might tend to the gardens, others might work in the scriptorium copying manuscripts, while others might care for the sick in the infirmary. Meals were simple affairs, often eaten in silence while one monk read aloud from religious texts. The diet was plain, usually consisting of bread, vegetables, and perhaps some fish. Meat was generally reserved for special occasions or for those who were ill. As evening approached, the monks would gather once more for vespers, followed by a light supper. The day would conclude with Compline, the final prayer service before bed. By this time, the monks had been awake for nearly 18 hours, their day filled with prayer, work, and contemplation. This rigorous schedule was followed day after day, week after week, with little variation. The monotony was broken only by religious festivals or the occasional visit from an important guest. While this routine might seem dull or oppressive to modern sensibilities, for many medieval monks, it provided a sense of purpose and spiritual fulfillment. The structured life allowed them to focus on their devotion to God and their pursuit of spiritual perfection. As we close our eyes and imagine this life of quiet contemplation, we might find ourselves drifting off to sleep, lulled by the steady rhythm of monastic life. The tolling of the bells fades into the distance as we slip into dreams of candlelit chapels and echoing Gregorian chants. As we delve deeper into the realm of medieval monasticism, we encounter the solemn practice of monastic vows. These sacred promises shaped the lives of those who dedicated themselves to a religious calling, often in ways that might seem perplexing to our modern sensibilities. The three primary vows taken by monks and nuns were poverty, chastity, and obedience. Let's explore each of these in turn, starting with the vow of poverty. This commitment required individuals to renounce all personal possessions and live a life of material simplicity. Imagine willingly giving up everything you own, your clothes, your favorite trinkets, even the coins in your pocket. For medieval monks, this wasn't just a suggestion, it was a binding promise. They relied entirely on the monastery for their basic needs, wearing simple robes and sharing communal meals. Next, we have the vow of chastity, which prohibited any form of sexual activity or romantic relationships. This vow was seen as a way to devote oneself fully to God, free from worldly distractions. For many, this meant a lifetime of celibacy, a concept that might seem particularly challenging to our modern minds. But it wasn't just about abstaining from physical intimacy. The vow of chastity also encompassed emotional and spiritual purity. Monks and nuns were expected to channel their energies into prayer, contemplation, and service to their religious community. Finally, there was the vow of obedience. This required complete submission to the authority of the abbot or abbess, as well as to the rules of the monastic order. Imagine having every aspect of your day dictated by someone else: when to wake, when to eat, when to pray, and when to sleep. This vow of obedience was perhaps the most challenging for many. It required surrendering one's own will and desires to the greater good of the community and the pursuit of spiritual perfection. Monks were expected to follow orders without question, even if they disagreed or found them difficult. These vows weren't taken lightly. The ceremony of profession, where a novice formally took their vows, was a solemn and often elaborate affair. It symbolized a complete break from their old life and a rebirth into a new existence dedicated to God. While these vows might seem restrictive to us, for many medieval individuals, they offered a sense of purpose and a path to salvation. Monasteries provided education, stability, and a structured life in a world that was often chaotic and unpredictable. However, it's important to note that not everyone adhered perfectly to these vows. History is rife with tales of monks and nuns who struggled with or even broke their sacred promises. These human failings remind us that even in the pursuit of spiritual perfection, the complexities of human nature persisted. As we delve deeper into the monotonous world of medieval life, let's turn our attention to the dietary habits within monasteries. While you might imagine monks living lives of austere simplicity, their eating habits were surprisingly complex and regimented. Monasteries followed strict schedules, and mealtimes were no exception. The daily routine typically included two main meals: prandium, served around midday, and cena, the evening meal. During certain religious periods, such as Lent, monks would often fast, consuming only one meal per day. The monastic diet was largely vegetarian, with meat generally reserved for the sick or elderly. Fish, however, was a common staple. Bread formed the foundation of most meals, often accompanied by vegetables grown in the monastery gardens. Beans, peas, and lentils were particularly popular due to their high protein content and long shelf life. Interestingly, despite their reputation for asceticism, many monasteries produced their own beer and wine. These beverages were not just for enjoyment, but were considered safer to drink than water, which was often contaminated. The alcohol content was typically lower than modern standards, allowing monks to maintain their focus on prayer and work. The preparation and consumption of food in monasteries were highly ritualized affairs. Meals were eaten in silence, with one monk often reading aloud from religious texts while the others ate. This practice was meant to nourish both body and soul simultaneously. Portion control was an important aspect of monastic dining. Overeating was considered a sin of gluttony, so monks were encouraged to eat moderately. However, the definition of moderate could vary widely between different monastic orders and individual monasteries. Some monasteries developed sophisticated culinary traditions, particularly those that hosted travelers or pilgrims. These establishments often had separate dining areas for guests, where more elaborate meals might be served. This hospitality was seen as a Christian duty and could enhance the monastery's reputation. Despite the generally simple fare, monasteries were not immune to culinary innovation. Many modern cheese varieties, for instance, were first developed by monks experimenting with preservation techniques. The famous Trappist beers of Belgium are another enduring legacy of monastic brewing traditions. As we conclude this segment on monastery diets, it's worth noting that while their meals may seem bland by today's standards, they were often more varied and nutritious than those of the average medieval peasant. The monastic approach to food, emphasizing moderation, ritual, and the spiritual aspects of eating, continues to influence some modern dietary philosophies. In the midst of the Dark Ages, monasteries stood as beacons of knowledge and learning, preserving ancient texts and fostering intellectual pursuits. However, for the average medieval peasant, these centers of enlightenment might as well have been on another planet. Monasteries were typically self-sufficient communities, isolated from the outside world. The monks who resided within their walls dedicated their lives to prayer, study, and the preservation of knowledge. While this sounds rather noble, it's important to remember that the vast majority of peasants couldn't even read, let alone access the wealth of information stored in these religious institutions. The process of becoming a monk was not exactly open to all. Many monasteries required novices to be literate, which immediately excluded most peasants. Additionally, joining a monastery often required a donation or gift to the institution, something few peasants could afford. So, while monasteries were centers of learning, they were largely inaccessible to the common folk. Even if a peasant did manage to gain entry to a monastery, the life of a monk was far from easy. The daily routine was rigorous and strictly regimented. Monks would rise before dawn for prayers, spend hours in silent contemplation, and engage in manual labor. The pursuit of knowledge was often secondary to religious devotion and the maintenance of the monastery itself. For those few peasants who did become monks, the transition could be jarring. Imagine going from a life of hard physical labor in the fields to one of quiet contemplation and scholarly pursuits. The mental strain of learning to read and write, often in Latin, would have been immense for someone who had never held a book before. It's also worth noting that the knowledge preserved in monasteries was heavily filtered through a religious lens. Scientific discoveries or philosophical ideas that contradicted church doctrine were often suppressed or altered. So even if a peasant did gain access to this learning, it was far from a complete or unbiased education by modern standards. In a twist of irony, while monasteries were preserving knowledge for future generations, they were simultaneously keeping it out of reach for the vast majority of their contemporaries. The average peasant would live and die without ever seeing the inside of a monastery library, let alone benefiting from the learning contained within. So while we might romanticize the idea of monasteries as bastions of learning in the Dark Ages, for the medieval peasant, they were just another reminder of the vast gulf between their daily lives and the world of the educated elite. The light of knowledge burned bright within monastery walls, but for most, it was a light they would never see. As we delve deeper into the dreary world of medieval peasants, let's explore the curious realm of monastery medical care. While these religious institutions offered a glimmer of hope for the sick and injured, their practices were often a peculiar blend of faith, folklore, and rudimentary medicine. Monasteries served as the primary healthcare providers for peasants who couldn't afford the services of trained physicians. These holy places were seen as sanctuaries of healing, where the power of prayer intertwined with primitive medical knowledge. Upon arriving at a monastery infirmary, a peasant might first encounter a monk acting as a diagnostician. However, their methods were far from what we'd consider scientific today. "Brother, tell me of your ailments. You feel a burning sensation. Perhaps the influence of Mars is strong in your humors. Let us examine the color of your urine to determine the imbalance within." Yes, you heard that correctly. Urine examination was a common diagnostic tool, with monks carefully scrutinizing the color, smell, and even taste of a patient's bodily fluids. It's safe to say that being a monastery doctor wasn't the most appealing career choice. Treatment options in these monastic infirmaries were equally unconventional by modern standards. Bloodletting, for instance, was a popular remedy for various ailments. "Your blood is too hot, my child. We must release the excess humors to restore balance. This leech application should do the trick." Leeches, cupping, and venesection were all common practices, based on the belief that illness was caused by an imbalance of the four bodily humors: blood, phlegm, yellow bile, and black bile. Herbal remedies also played a significant role in monastic medicine. Monastery gardens were often filled with medicinal plants, each believed to have specific healing properties. "For your fever, we shall prepare a tincture of feverfew and willow bark, and to ward off evil spirits that may be causing your affliction, wear this garlic poultice around your neck." While some of these herbal treatments had genuine medicinal value, others were based more on superstition than science. The line between medicine and mysticism was often blurred in these sacred halls of healing. Prayer and religious rituals were integral to the healing process. Monks would often recite prayers and perform blessings alongside their medical treatments, believing that spiritual intervention was crucial for recovery. Let us pray to Saint Cosmas and Saint Damian, the patron saints of physicians, to guide our hands and bless this remedy. For medieval peasants, these monastic infirmaries offered a mix of comfort and confusion. While the care they received was often better than nothing, it was far from the evidence-based medicine we rely on today. The next time you visit a modern hospital, be thankful you're not being prescribed a leech treatment or a garlic necklace. As we conclude our exploration of medieval monasteries, it's clear that these institutions played a pivotal role in shaping the Middle Ages. Far from being isolated retreats, monasteries were dynamic centers of learning, culture, and social interaction. The monks' dedication to preserving knowledge through meticulous copying of manuscripts ensured that much of ancient wisdom survived the tumultuous times. Their scriptoriums were the medieval equivalent of modern-day data centers, safeguarding information for future generations. Moreover, monasteries often served as the backbone of local communities. They provided education, healthcare, and spiritual guidance to the surrounding populace. The monastery's infirmary might have been the only place where common folk could receive medical treatment, rudimentary as it was by today's standards. Let's not forget the technological innovations that emerged from these cloistered walls. Monastic breweries perfected techniques for producing beer and wine, while their gardens were hotbeds of agricultural experimentation. The monastery clock, regulating daily life, was a precursor to the precise timekeeping we take for granted today. As we drift off to sleep, ponder this. The echoes of monastic life still resonate in our modern world. From the universities that grew out of cathedral schools to the charitable organizations inspired by monastic almsgiving, the legacy of these medieval institutions continues to shape our society in subtle yet profound ways. As we leave behind the harsh realities of medieval peasant life, let's shift our focus to another equally dreary aspect of history. Prepare yourself for a journey into the monotonous world of ancient grain storage techniques. Yes, you heard that correctly. We're about to explore the riveting topic of how civilizations kept their cereals fresh. As we transition from the gloomy depths of medieval peasant life, let's journey back even further in time to the sun-drenched shores of ancient Greece. While often romanticized in modern culture, life in this classical civilization wasn't all philosophy and Olympic games. In fact, for many inhabitants of the Greek city-states, daily existence was filled with its own unique set of challenges and hardships. So let's peel back the marble columns and golden laurels to explore why being an average person in ancient Greece might not have been as glorious as we imagine. Let's journey back to ancient Greece, where city life was far from the idyllic scenes often portrayed in modern media. Picture yourself in Athens, circa 400 BCE. The streets are narrow, winding, and unpaved, filled with a cacophony of sounds and less than pleasant aromas. As you navigate these bustling thoroughfares, you're constantly dodging carts, animals, and the occasional bucket of waste being tossed from upper windows. Yes, that's right, proper sewage systems were a luxury many Greek cities lacked. Instead, residents often disposed of their waste directly onto the streets below. The agora or marketplace forms the heart of the city. It's a hive of activity, but not always in a good way. Pickpockets and con artists mingle with honest merchants, while the air is thick with the smell of fish, meat, and unwashed bodies. Hygiene standards were, shall we say, somewhat different from our modern expectations. Speaking of hygiene, public baths were common in Greek cities. However, these weren't the relaxing spa experiences we might imagine. The water was rarely changed, and the baths became breeding grounds for bacteria and parasites. Imagine sharing a bath with dozens of strangers in increasingly murky water, not exactly a refreshing experience. Housing for the average citizen was far from luxurious. Most people lived in small, cramped apartments with entire families sharing a single room. These dwellings often lacked proper ventilation and were prone to fires due to the use of oil lamps for lighting. The streets at night were dangerous places. With no street lighting, the cover of darkness emboldened criminals. Wealthy citizens often hired bodyguards to escort them after sunset, while the less fortunate risked assault or robbery if they ventured out. Even during the day, life could be perilous. The concept of traffic laws didn't exist, and accidents involving carts or animals were common. Add to this the frequent outbreaks of disease due to poor sanitation, and you start to understand why life expectancy in ancient Greek cities was remarkably low. Despite these challenges, Greek cities were also centers of innovation and culture. The same streets that reeked of waste also echoed with philosophical debates and political discussions. Theaters and temples provided entertainment and spiritual solace, offering a counterpoint to the harsh realities of daily life. So while we might romanticize ancient Greek civilization, the reality of city life was far from glamorous. It was a world of stark contrasts, intellectual brilliance alongside squalid living conditions, architectural marvels rising above streets filled with filth. Perhaps it's a reminder that human progress is a long, often messy journey, with each era facing its own unique set of challenges. As we drift through the annals of history, let's take a moment to explore the birthplace of democracy, ancient Greece. While it might seem like a shining beacon of political progress, the reality of Greek democracy was far from perfect. In Athens, around 500 BCE, a system of government emerged that allowed citizens to participate directly in political decisions. This was a revolutionary concept at the time, but it's important to note that citizens was a very exclusive category. Women, slaves, and foreigners were completely excluded from the democratic process. In fact, it's estimated that only about 10–20% of the population in Athens could actually participate in this so-called democracy. So much for representation for all. The Athenian democracy operated through a system of assemblies and councils. The main assembly, called the ecclesia, met about 40 times a year on a hill called the Phoenix. Here, citizens would gather to debate and vote on various issues. But don't imagine some orderly parliamentary procedure. These assemblies could be chaotic affairs, with shouting matches and heated arguments. Imagine trying to get anything done when every decision requires a majority vote from thousands of opinionated citizens. One peculiar feature of Athenian democracy was ostracism. Once a year, citizens could vote to exile a person they believed was becoming too powerful or dangerous to the state. The chosen individual would be banished for 10 years. Talk about taking cancel culture to the extreme. Another interesting aspect was the use of sortition, or random selection, to fill many government positions. The Athenians believed this method was more democratic than elections, which could be influenced by wealth or fame. Imagine if we chose our modern politicians by lottery, it might not be much worse than what we have now. Despite its flaws, Greek democracy did introduce some important concepts. The idea of isgoria, or equality of speech, meant that any citizen could speak up in the assembly. This principle of free speech has become a cornerstone of modern democracies. However, let's not romanticize this system too much. The Greek democracy was often unstable and prone to making rash decisions. In 406 BCE, the Athenian assembly voted to execute 6 of their own generals after a naval victory, simply because they failed to rescue some sailors during a storm. Talk about ungrateful. As we drift off to sleep, ponder this. While ancient Greek democracy was groundbreaking for its time, it was far from the idealized system we might imagine. It was messy, exclusive, and often dysfunctional, not unlike many modern political systems. Perhaps that's a comforting thought as we deal with our own imperfect democracies today. The ancient Greek diet might surprise you with its simplicity and health benefits. Unlike our modern, processed, food-filled diets, the Greeks relied heavily on what their Mediterranean climate could provide. At the core of their diet was the famous Mediterranean: wheat, olive oil, and wine. Wheat was the foundation of their daily sustenance, consumed primarily as bread. This wasn't your fluffy white bread, mind you, but a hearty, whole-grain variety that provided substantial nutrition. Olive oil, often referred to as liquid gold, was used liberally in cooking and as a condiment. The Greeks believed it had both culinary and medicinal properties. They weren't wrong. We now know olive oil is rich in healthy monounsaturated fats and antioxidants. Wine, the third member of this triad, was typically watered down and consumed in moderation. It wasn't just a beverage, but a significant part of their culture and religious practices. Vegetables played a crucial role in the Greek diet. Onions, garlic, cabbage, and legumes like lentils and beans were staples. These provided essential vitamins, minerals, and fiber. Leafy greens such as lettuce, arugula, and chicory were also common. Fruits were seasonal treats. Figs and grapes were particularly popular, often dried to preserve them for the winter months. Apples, pears, and pomegranates also graced their tables when in season. Protein came primarily from legumes, but meat was consumed as well, albeit less frequently than in our modern diets. Fish was more common in coastal areas, while inland regions relied more on poultry and pork. Beef was less common and often reserved for religious sacrifices. Dairy products, particularly cheese made from sheep or goat's milk, were also part of the Greek diet. However, milk itself was not commonly consumed by adults. Honey was the primary sweetener, used in both food and drinks. It was often combined with nuts to create sweet treats. This diet, rich in plant-based foods, healthy fats, and moderate amounts of lean protein, is now recognized as one of the healthiest in the world. The Greek diet, along with their active lifestyle, contributed to their overall well-being and longevity. Interestingly, the ancient Greeks didn't just eat for sustenance. They saw food as a way to maintain balance in the body. They believed in the concept of humors, bodily fluids that needed to be in equilibrium for good health. Different foods were thought to affect these humors, and thus, diet was seen as a key to maintaining health. As we drift further into the annals of history, let's turn our attention to the birthplace of Western philosophy, ancient Greece. In the sun-drenched streets of Athens and the bustling agoras of other Greek city-states, a revolution of thought was taking place that would shape the course of human understanding for millennia to come. Picture, if you will, a group of men in flowing robes, engaged in heated debate under the shade of an olive tree. These were the early Greek philosophers, individuals who dared to question the nature of reality, existence, and the human condition. Their ideas, while sometimes seemingly abstract, laid the foundation for much of our modern thinking. One of the earliest and most influential of these thinkers was Thales of Miletus, often considered the father of Western philosophy. Thales proposed that water was the fundamental substance of all matter, a concept that, while incorrect, represented one of the first attempts to explain the world through natural, rather than supernatural, means. Following in Thales' footsteps came a succession of pre-Socratic philosophers, each offering their own theories about the nature of reality. Anaximander suggested that the universe originated from an indefinite, unlimited substance he called the apeiron. Heraclitus famously declared that change was the only constant in the universe, encapsulated in his famous quote, "No man ever steps in the same river twice." But it was with the arrival of Socrates in the 5th century BCE that Greek philosophy truly began to flourish. Socrates, with his method of relentless questioning, challenged the assumptions of his fellow Athenians and sought to uncover the true nature of concepts like justice, virtue, and knowledge. Plato, Socrates' most famous student, took his teacher's ideas and developed them into a complex philosophical system. In his famous Allegory of the Cave, Plato explored the nature of reality and human perception, suggesting that what we perceive as reality might be merely shadows on a cave wall. Aristotle, Plato's student and perhaps the most influential of all Greek philosophers, turned his keen mind to a wide range of subjects. From ethics and politics to biology and physics, Aristotle's works would dominate Western thought for nearly 2 millennia. As we ponder these weighty ideas, it's worth noting that Greek philosophy wasn't just about abstract concepts. The Stoics, for instance, developed practical philosophies for living a good life, emphasizing virtue, self-control, and acceptance of life's challenges. Meanwhile, the Epicureans sought to understand the nature of happiness, arguing that pleasure, properly understood, was the highest good. Their teachings on atoms and the nature of the universe were remarkably prescient, foreshadowing some aspects of modern physics. As our journey through Greek philosophy comes to a close, we're left with a sense of the profound impact these ancient thinkers had on the development of human thought. Their questions and ideas continue to resonate through the centuries, inviting us to ponder the same fundamental questions about existence, knowledge, and the good life that they grappled with so long ago. As we journey through the annals of history, let's turn our attention to the fascinating world of Greek medicine. While the ancient Greeks made significant contributions to the field of healthcare, their practices were often a peculiar blend of science, superstition, and sometimes outright dangerous methods. In ancient Greece, the god of healing, Asclepius, played a central role in medical practices. Temples dedicated to Asclepius, known as Asclepia, served as early hospitals and sanatoriums. Patients would sleep in these temples, believing that the god would visit them in their dreams and provide cures for their ailments. One of the most famous Greek physicians was Hippocrates, often referred to as the father of medicine. He introduced the concept of the 4 humors: blood, phlegm, yellow bile, and black bile. According to this theory, an imbalance in these bodily fluids was the root cause of all illnesses. To restore balance, Greek doctors employed various treatments, some of which might make you cringe. Bloodletting, for instance, was a common practice. They believed that by draining excess blood from the body, they could cure a wide range of ailments from headaches to fever. Another popular treatment was the use of leeches. These blood-sucking creatures were applied to patients' skin to draw out bad blood. Imagine waking up to find dozens of leeches attached to your body, not exactly a comforting sight. Greek physicians also relied heavily on herbal remedies. While some of these plant-based treatments had genuine medicinal properties, others were based more on folklore than scientific evidence. For example, mandrake root was used as a painkiller and sedative, but it was also believed to have magical properties due to its human-like shape. Surgery in ancient Greece was a risky affair. Without proper anesthesia or understanding of infection, even minor procedures could be life-threatening. Surgeons often used wine to clean wounds and instruments, which provided some antiseptic properties, though they didn't understand why it worked. One particularly unpleasant surgical tool was the trepan, a device used to drill holes in the skull. This procedure, known as trepanation, was believed to relieve pressure on the brain and cure various ailments, including headaches and mental disorders. Despite these questionable practices, Greek medicine did lay the groundwork for modern medical ethics. The Hippocratic Oath, still referenced today, emphasized the importance of patient confidentiality and the principle of first, do no harm. As we drift off to sleep, let's be grateful for the advancements in modern medicine. While ancient Greek healers had good intentions, their methods often left much to be desired. Sweet dreams, and be thankful you won't wake up covered in leeches or with a hole in your skull. As we delve into the world of ancient Greek warfare, prepare to be lulled by the monotonous details of battle formations and weaponry. The Greeks, known for their love of olives and philosophy, also had a penchant for organized violence. Let's start with the hoplite, the backbone of Greek armies. These heavily armored infantry soldiers were about as exciting as watching paint dry on a shield. They wore bronze armor, carried a large round shield called an aspis, and wielded a spear known as a dory. The formation they used, called a phalanx, was essentially a wall of shields and pointy sticks. The phalanx formation was so mind-numbingly effective that it remained unchanged for centuries. Picture rows upon rows of men, shoulder to shoulder, shields overlapping, slowly inching forward like a heavily armed group of tortoises. The front rank would lower their spears, creating a bristling hedge of sharp points. Riveting stuff, isn't it? Greek armies also employed light infantry and cavalry, but let's be honest, they were mostly there to make the hoplites look good. The light infantry, or peltastes, threw javelins and ran away. The cavalry, meanwhile, pranced around on horses, looking pretty but rarely deciding battles. Now let's talk about siege warfare, a process so tedious it could put an insomniac to sleep. Greek cities were often protected by walls, so armies would camp outside and wait, and wait, and wait some more. They'd build siege engines like battering rams and siege towers, which were essentially giant wooden boxes on wheels. Imagine the thrill of pushing a wooden box towards a wall for days on end. Of course, we can't forget naval warfare. The Greeks loved their triremes, warships with 3 rows of oars. Naval battles consisted of ships ramming into each other or sailing alongside enemy vessels so soldiers could jump aboard. It was like a very slow, very wet game of bumper cars. Greek warfare wasn't all about brute force, though. They also employed cunning strategies like the Trojan horse. Nothing says military genius quite like hiding inside a large wooden animal and hopping your enemies are gullible enough to wheel it into their city. In conclusion, Greek warfare was a fascinating blend of strategy, bravery, and mind-numbing repetition. From the steadfast hoplites to the siege engines that moved at a snail's pace, it's clear that patience was as much a virtue in battle as skill with a sword. So the next time you're having trouble sleeping, just imagine yourself as a Greek soldier, standing in formation for hours, waiting for the command to slowly march forward. Sweet dreams. As we conclude our journey through ancient Greece, we're left with a complex tapestry of achievements and contradictions. The Greeks gave us democracy, philosophy, and breathtaking art, yet their society was built on the backs of slaves and excluded women from public life. Their city-states were crucibles of innovation, but also hotbeds of conflict. Athens and Sparta, though united against Persian invasion, eventually turned on each other in the devastating Peloponnesian War. This internal strife weakened Greece, paving the way for conquest by Philip II of Macedon and his son, Alexander the Great. The legacy of ancient Greece, however, far outlived its political dominance. Greek ideas spread across the known world through Alexander's conquests, giving rise to the Hellenistic period. This era saw Greek culture blend with Eastern traditions, creating a rich fusion that would influence art, science, and philosophy for centuries to come. From the dialogues of Plato to the plays of Sophocles, from the Parthenon to the Olympic Games, the fingerprints of ancient Greece are still visible in our modern world. Their quest for knowledge, their celebration of human potential, and their exploration of fundamental questions about existence continue to resonate with us today. As we drift off to sleep, let's remember that history, even at its most ancient, is not just a collection of distant facts. It's a mirror reflecting our own struggles, aspirations, and the timeless human drive to understand our place in the cosmos. As we leave behind the harsh realities of medieval peasant life, let's journey forward in time. Our next topic explores another group who faced their own unique set of challenges. We'll delve into the lives of Victorian-era factory workers, where industrialization brought both progress and peril. Now let's delve into the fascinating world of medieval medicine, where superstition often trumped science. Imagine falling ill in a time when leeches were considered cutting-edge treatment and your local barber doubled as a surgeon. From bizarre remedies to questionable practices, the medical landscape of the Middle Ages was a far cry from our modern healthcare system. Prepare yourself for a journey through the often gruesome and occasionally comical realm of medieval healing, where the cure might just be worse than the disease. Now let's delve into one of the most peculiar medical theories of the Middle Ages, the four humors theory. This concept dominated medical thinking for centuries and had a profound impact on how medieval physicians approached health and illness. The four humors theory, originally proposed by ancient Greek physicians, was enthusiastically embraced by medieval doctors. They believed that the human body was filled with four basic substances, called humors, which were in delicate balance when a person was healthy. These four humors were black bile, yellow bile, phlegm, and blood. Each humor was associated with a particular element and set of qualities. Black bile was linked to earth and was considered cold and dry. Yellow bile was associated with fire and thought to be hot and dry. Phlegm was connected to water and described as cold and moist. Finally, blood was tied to air and believed to be hot and moist. Medieval physicians believed that an imbalance in these humors was the root cause of all illnesses. For instance, if you had a fever, they might conclude that you had an excess of yellow bile, the hot humor. If you were lethargic or depressed, they'd suspect an overabundance of black bile. The treatments prescribed based on this theory were often bizarre and sometimes dangerous. To restore balance, doctors would attempt to remove the excess humor. This led to practices like bloodletting, where they would cut open a vein and drain blood from the patient. They also used purgatives and emetics to induce vomiting or diarrhea, believing this would expel the problematic humors. Diet was another crucial aspect of humor-based medicine. Foods were classified according to their supposed humoral qualities. For example, if you were diagnosed with an excess of cold and moist humors, you might be prescribed hot and dry foods to counteract the imbalance. This theory also extended to personality types. People were categorized into four temperaments based on which humor was thought to be dominant in their body. Those with an excess of blood were considered sanguine, cheerful, and passionate. An abundance of yellow bile made one choleric, ambitious, and leader-like. Phlegmatic individuals, dominated by phlegm, were thought to be calm and unemotional. Finally, those with a prevalence of black bile were labeled melancholic, creative, but prone to sadness. While the four humors theory seems absurd by modern standards, it was considered cutting-edge medical science in medieval times. It provided a framework for understanding the human body and its ailments, even if that understanding was fundamentally flawed. The theory persisted well into the 19th century, before finally being discarded in favor of more evidence-based approaches to medicine. Moving on to another delightful aspect of medieval life, let's explore the charming practice of bloodletting. Ah yes, nothing says advanced medical care quite like deliberately draining blood from a sick person. Bloodletting was a common medical treatment in medieval Europe based on the misguided belief that an imbalance of bodily fluids or humors caused illness. The theory was simple: too much blood, let's get rid of some. It's like trying to fix a leaky boat by drilling more holes in it. Physicians of the time believed that by releasing bad or excess blood, they could cure a wide range of ailments. Got a headache? Bloodletting. Fever? Bloodletting. Stubbed your toe? You guessed it, bloodletting. It was the medieval equivalent of turn it off and on again, but with more risk of infection and death. The methods used for bloodletting were varied and equally unpleasant. One popular technique involved using leeches. Yes, those slimy, blood-sucking creatures were considered medical marvels. Imagine going to the doctor and being told, "Good news, we're going to cover you in leeches." Suddenly, that root canal doesn't sound so bad, does it? For those who preferred their blood draining without the wriggly creatures, there was always the option of venesection. This involved cutting a vein, usually in the arm, and letting the blood flow into a bowl. It was like donating blood, except instead of saving lives, you were probably shortening your own. The amount of blood removed during a session could be substantial. In some cases, up to 50% of a person's blood volume might be drained. It's a wonder anyone survived the treatment, let alone the illness they were trying to cure. Talk about throwing the baby out with the bathwater, or in this case, the patient out with the blood. Bloodletting wasn't just for the commoners either, even royalty got in on the action. King Charles II of England was reportedly bled of a quart of blood to treat a seizure. Spoiler alert, it didn't work. He died shortly after. But hey, at least he died with perfectly balanced humors right. The practice of bloodletting persisted for centuries, well into the 19th century. It's a testament to human stubbornness that we kept doing something so clearly ineffective for so long. Then again, given some of the medical advice floating around on social media these days, perhaps we shouldn't be too quick to judge our ancestors. So the next time you're feeling under the weather and reach for some over-the-counter medicine, take a moment to appreciate how far we've come. At least your doctor isn't suggesting you become a human juice box for leeches. Although, who knows, maybe in a few hundred years, people will look back at our medical practices with the same mixture of horror and amusement. Here's hoping we're at least a little bit closer to getting it right. As we delve deeper into the world of medieval peasants, we encounter their unique approach to healthcare, herbal remedies. In an era devoid of modern medicine, these natural concoctions were often the only recourse for the sick and injured. Imagine you're a medieval peasant suffering from a pounding headache. Instead of reaching for aspirin, you might have turned to feverfew, a daisy-like plant known for its pain-relieving properties. The leaves would be crushed and mixed with water to create a bitter-tasting tea that was believed to ease migraines and reduce fever. For digestive issues, which were rampant due to poor sanitation and questionable food quality, peasants often relied on peppermint. This versatile herb was used to soothe upset stomachs, relieve gas, and even freshen breath. Peppermint leaves would be chewed raw or steeped in hot water to make a soothing tea. Wounds and infections, common occurrences in the harsh medieval world, were treated with garlic. Known for its antibacterial properties, garlic was crushed into a paste and applied directly to cuts and sores. The pungent smell might have been off-putting, but it was certainly preferable to the alternative of untreated infections. For those suffering from insomnia or anxiety, valerian root was the go-to remedy. This herb, still used in some sleep aids today, was dried and made into a tea. Peasants would drink this earthy-tasting brew before bed, hoping for a restful night's sleep amidst their difficult lives. Chamomile, another herb still popular today, was used for a variety of ailments. Its flowers were brewed into a gentle tea that was believed to calm nerves, aid digestion, and even help with menstrual cramps. For peasant women dealing with the physical demands of rural life, this soothing drink offered a moment of respite. In cases of coughs and colds, peasants turned to thyme. This aromatic herb was made into a tea or syrup, sometimes mixed with honey to make it more palatable. Its natural expectorant properties were believed to help clear congested airways and soothe sore throats. While these herbal remedies provided some relief, it's important to note that they were often used in conjunction with superstitious practices and prayers. The line between medicine and magic was blurry in medieval times, and peasants would often combine herbal treatments with religious rituals or folk magic in hopes of a cure. Despite the limitations of medieval medicine, many of these herbal remedies have stood the test of time. Modern science has validated some of their medicinal properties, showing that our medieval ancestors weren't entirely misguided in their approach to health care. However, the lack of proper dosage and potential side effects meant that these treatments could sometimes do more harm than good. As if life wasn't challenging enough for medieval peasants, their experiences with medical care, particularly surgery, were nothing short of nightmarish. Let's delve into the gruesome world of medieval surgery, where the cure was often worse than the disease. In the Middle Ages, surgery was a far cry from the sterile, precise procedures we know today. Surgeons, if you could call them that, were often barbers who moonlighted as medical practitioners. These barber surgeons were armed with little more than sharp blades, crude tools, and a rudimentary understanding of anatomy. Anesthesia as we know it didn't exist. The best a patient could hope for was a strong drink or a knock on the head to dull the pain. Imagine undergoing an amputation with nothing but a mug of ale to numb your senses. It's no wonder that many patients didn't survive the shock and pain of these procedures. Hygiene was another major issue. The concept of germs was unknown, and sterilization was non-existent. Surgeons would often use the same unwashed instruments on multiple patients, unknowingly spreading infections. They might wipe their blades on their aprons or give them a quick rinse in dirty water before moving on to the next unfortunate soul. One common surgical procedure was bloodletting, based on the misguided belief that illness was caused by an imbalance of humors in the body. Surgeons would cut open veins or use leeches to drain blood, often weakening patients who were already sick. This practice persisted for centuries, despite its obvious drawbacks. Trepanation, the practice of drilling holes in the skull to relieve pressure or release evil spirits, was another horrifying procedure. While it occasionally provided relief for certain conditions, it was often performed unnecessarily and with predictably dire consequences. For internal ailments, surgery was a last resort and often a death sentence. Without proper understanding of anatomy or the ability to prevent infection, opening up the body cavity was extremely risky. Many patients who underwent such procedures died from blood loss, shock, or subsequent infections. In the rare event that a patient survived surgery, they faced a long and painful recovery. With no effective pain management and limited understanding of post-operative care, many succumbed to complications in the days and weeks following their procedures. It's a testament to human resilience that anyone survived these brutal medical practices. The next time you visit a modern hospital, take a moment to appreciate how far we've come from the days when your barber might also be your surgeon. As if the plague itself wasn't bad enough, the treatments medieval people used to combat it were often just as horrifying. Let's delve into some of the most bizarre and ineffective plague treatments that were popular during this dark period of history. One of the most common treatments was bloodletting. People believed that by draining bad blood from the body, they could rid themselves of the disease. Barber surgeons would use leeches or make incisions to let out the supposedly tainted blood. This practice, of course, only weakened patients further and likely contributed to many deaths. Another popular remedy was the use of herbal concoctions. While some herbs might have had mild medicinal properties, others were downright dangerous. One such mixture, called the Four Thieves vinegar, consisted of vinegar infused with herbs like wormwood, meadowsweet, and garlic. People would drink it or rub it on their bodies, hoping it would ward off the plague. Perhaps one of the strangest treatments was the use of animal excrement. Yes, you heard that right. Physicians would create poultices made from animal dung and apply them to the swollen lymph nodes or buboes characteristic of the plague. This unsanitary practice likely introduced even more harmful bacteria into already weakened bodies. Some people turned to aromatherapy, believing that strong smells could purify the air and prevent infection. They would carry posies of fragrant flowers or pomanders filled with aromatic herbs. While this might have provided some psychological comfort, it did little to actually prevent the spread of the disease. Religious treatments were also common. Many believed the plague was a punishment from God, so they engaged in extreme acts of penance. This included self-flagellation, where groups of people would whip themselves in public processions, hoping to appease divine wrath. One of the most desperate measures was the consumption of precious metals. Some wealthy individuals would eat small amounts of crushed gold or silver, believing these substances had curative properties. Needless to say, this expensive treatment was as ineffective as it was potentially harmful. Superstitious remedies abounded as well. People would wear amulets or talismans, often inscribed with magical symbols or prayers. Some even resorted to wearing dead toads around their necks, believing the animal would absorb the disease. As the plague continued to ravage populations, increasingly bizarre treatments emerged. Some physicians recommended sitting in sewers to counteract the disease with equally foul odors. Others advised patients to surround themselves with onions, thinking the pungent vegetable could absorb the plague's miasma. As we conclude our exploration of medieval medicine, it's clear that the practices of the time were a far cry from the scientific approach we enjoy today. The combination of superstition, religious beliefs, and limited understanding of the human body led to treatments that were often ineffective and sometimes downright dangerous. The Four Humors theory, while an attempt to systematize medical knowledge, ultimately hindered progress by focusing on incorrect assumptions about the body's functions. Bloodletting, a common practice based on this theory, likely caused more harm than good, weakening patients who were already ill. Herbal remedies, while occasionally effective, were often administered without a true understanding of their properties or proper dosages. The use of toxic substances like mercury and lead in treatments further endangered patients, leading to long-term health issues and even death. Perhaps most troubling was the lack of proper hygiene and sanitation in medical practices. The absence of germ theory meant that infections spread easily, and simple procedures could lead to life-threatening complications. However, it's important to remember that medieval physicians and healers were doing their best with the knowledge available to them. Their efforts, though misguided by modern standards, laid the groundwork for future medical advancements. As we drift off to sleep, let's be grateful for the progress we've made in medical science, while also reflecting on the resilience of those who lived through these challenging times in history. As we conclude our exploration of medieval peasant life, let's shift our focus to another equally mundane aspect of history. Prepare to drift deeper into slumber as we delve into the tedious world of ancient bureaucracy and the mind-numbing intricacies of early tax collection systems. As we sail through the annals of history, our journey now takes us to the frigid waters of the North Atlantic. Picture yourself aboard a longship, surrounded by bearded warriors with axes and shields. Yes, we're delving into the world of Viking exploration. But before you imagine heroic quests and legendary conquests, let's consider the less glamorous aspects of these seafaring adventures. From cramped quarters on wooden vessels to months of salted fish dinners, Viking exploration wasn't always the glorious saga we might imagine. So, settle in as we uncover why being a Viking explorer might have been more miserable than magnificent. As we sail through the annals of history, let's dock our ship of knowledge at the fascinating world of Viking vessels. These Norse seafarers were not just fearsome warriors, they were also masterful shipbuilders whose innovations revolutionized maritime technology. Viking ships were marvels of engineering for their time, designed to be both seaworthy and versatile. The most famous of these was the Longship, a sleek vessel that could navigate both open seas and shallow rivers. These ships were typically between 17 and 37 meters long, powered by a combination of sail and oars. The secret to the Longship's success lay in its unique construction. Built using a technique called clinker construction, the hull was made of overlapping wooden planks, creating a strong yet flexible structure. This allowed the ship to flex with the waves, rather than fighting against them, making it incredibly resilient in rough seas. But the ingenuity didn't stop there. The shallow draft of these ships, sometimes as little as 50 centimeters, allowed Vikings to navigate inland waterways and even beach their vessels directly on shore. This gave them a significant tactical advantage, enabling surprise raids and quick escapes. The Longship's distinctive dragon or serpent head adorning the prow wasn't just for show. These ornate carvings were believed to protect the ship and its crew from sea monsters and evil spirits. They were often removable, allowing the Vikings to approach foreign shores without alarming the locals, at least not until it was too late. However, longships weren't the only vessels in the Viking fleet. They also had nars, which were wider, deeper ships used primarily for trade. These sturdy vessels could carry up to 24 tons of cargo, allowing Vikings to transport goods across vast distances, from the fjords of Norway to the markets of Constantinople. One of the most remarkable aspects of Viking shipbuilding was their navigation techniques. Without compasses or modern navigational tools, Vikings relied on the sun, stars, and intimate knowledge of sea currents and bird migrations. They even used a mysterious sunstone, believed to be a type of crystal that could determine the sun's position on overcast days. The impact of Viking ship technology extended far beyond their era. Their shipbuilding techniques influenced naval architecture for centuries, and their fearless exploration paved the way for later European voyages of discovery. In fact, some historians argue that without Viking innovations in shipbuilding, the later age of exploration might have been significantly delayed. So the next time you see a depiction of a Viking longship, remember, you're not just looking at a boat. You're witnessing a testament to human ingenuity, a vessel that carried not just warriors and traders, but also the seeds of technological advancement that would shape the course of maritime history. As we continue our journey through the dreary lives of medieval peasants, let's explore how these unfortunate souls navigated their world. In an era long before GPS or even reliable maps, getting from one place to another was a challenge that could rival the most arduous of modern-day adventures. Imagine, if you will, a world without street signs, house numbers, or even paved roads. This was the reality for medieval peasants. Their primary method of navigation relied heavily on natural landmarks and local knowledge passed down through generations. A large oak tree might mark the halfway point to the next village, while a distinctive rock formation could indicate a turn in the path. Rivers and streams played a crucial role in navigation, serving as both obstacles and guides. Peasants often used these waterways as reference points, following their courses to reach distant destinations. However, this method had its drawbacks, as seasonal flooding could dramatically alter the landscape and render familiar routes impassable. For those rare occasions when a peasant needed to venture beyond their immediate surroundings, they might seek guidance from travelers or merchants passing through. These encounters were valuable opportunities to gather information about distant lands and update their mental maps of the world. In some regions, primitive signposts did exist, usually at crossroads or important junctions. These crude markers might indicate the direction and approximate distance to nearby towns or significant landmarks. However, given the low literacy rates among peasants, these signs often relied on simple pictograms or well-known symbols rather than written words. The concept of precise distance measurement was largely foreign to medieval peasants. Instead, they relied on more relative units of measurement. A journey might be described as taking from sunrise to midday or 3 days' walk. This imprecise system made planning long journeys a daunting task, fraught with uncertainty. For those peasants living near the coast or major rivers, celestial navigation provided some assistance. The position of the sun during the day and the North Star at night offered basic directional guidance. However, this method was of limited use in dense forests or on overcast days, which were all too common in medieval Europe. It's worth noting that most peasants rarely traveled far from their villages. The concept of leisure travel was non-existent, and venturing too far from home could be seen as suspicious or even criminal. This limited mobility further reinforced the importance of local knowledge in navigation. As we drift off to sleep, pondering these primitive navigation methods, we can appreciate the ease with which we traverse our modern world. The next time you effortlessly follow your GPS to a new destination, spare a thought for the medieval peasant, relying on nothing more than memory, natural landmarks, and perhaps a crude wooden signpost to find their way home. In the early 11th century, Norse explorer Leif Erikson set sail from Greenland, venturing westward across the Atlantic. His journey led him to a land he named Vinland, believed to be part of present-day Newfoundland in Canada. This discovery predated Christopher Columbus's famous voyage by nearly 500 years, yet it remains a lesser-known chapter in the annals of exploration. Leif's father, Eric the Red, had already established Norse settlements in Greenland, but the harsh climate and limited resources pushed the Vikings to seek new lands. Vinland, with its abundance of natural resources, including timber and wild grapes, seemed like a promising new frontier. The name Vinland itself is thought to mean wine land or meadow land, hinting at the region's perceived fertility. Following Leif's initial expedition, his family, particularly his brother Thorvald and sister Freydis, led subsequent voyages to Vinland. These trips were not merely exploratory, they aimed to establish a permanent settlement. Around the year 1010, Thorfinn Karlsefni, an Icelandic explorer, organized the most ambitious colonization attempt, bringing with him 60 men and 5 women, along with livestock and supplies. The settlers constructed a small village at Elant's Ox Meadows on the northern tip of Newfoundland. Archaeological evidence discovered in the 1960s confirms the presence of Norse buildings, including longhouses, a forge, and workshops. These structures were built using the same techniques employed in Greenland and Iceland, showcasing the Vikings' adaptability to new environments. However, life in Vinland was far from easy. The Norse settlers faced numerous challenges, including harsh winters, limited agricultural potential, and most significantly, hostile relations with the indigenous people they encountered. The Vikings called these natives Skrælings, and initial peaceful trading soon gave way to violent conflicts. One particularly notable incident involved Freydis, Leif's half-sister. According to the sagas, during an attack by the Skrælings, Freydis, who was pregnant at the time, stood her ground. She allegedly picked up a fallen warrior's sword and struck her bare chest with it, frightening the attackers and driving them away. While this tale may be embellished, it illustrates the dangers and tensions the settlers faced. Despite their resilience, the Vinland settlement was short-lived. After only a few years, possibly around 1020, the Norse abandoned their New World colony. The combination of constant conflict with the indigenous population, the long and perilous supply route from Greenland, and the settlement's isolated nature all contributed to its failure. The Vinland saga, while brief, left an indelible mark on history. It demonstrated the Vikings' extraordinary seafaring abilities and their capacity to reach distant lands long before the age of European exploration truly began. Today, Elance Ox Meadows stands as a UNESCO World Heritage Site, a testament to this remarkable, if ultimately unsuccessful, venture into the unknown. As we journey through the annals of medieval history, let's take a moment to explore the intricate web of trade routes that crisscross the known world. These vital arteries of commerce were the lifeblood of medieval economies, connecting distant lands and cultures in ways that would shape the course of history. Picture, if you will, the legendary Silk Road. This wasn't just a single path, but a vast network of routes stretching from China to the Mediterranean. Caravans laden with precious silks, spices, and exotic goods would traverse treacherous deserts and mountain passes, braving bandits and harsh climates to bring their wares to eager markets. But the Silk Road wasn't the only game in town. The Indian Ocean trade routes were equally important, linking the shores of East Africa, Arabia, India, and Southeast Asia. Dhows and junks, guided by the seasonal monsoon winds, would sail these waters, exchanging gold, ivory, and textiles for porcelain, spices, and other luxuries. In Europe, the Hanseatic League dominated trade in the North and Baltic seas. This powerful confederation of merchant guilds and market towns controlled the flow of goods like fur, amber, and salt throughout northern Europe, amassing great wealth and influence in the process. Meanwhile, the Mediterranean remained a bustling hub of commerce, with Italian city-states like Venice and Genoa acting as gateways between East and West. Their merchant fleets would sail to distant ports, returning with holds full of silks, spices, and other treasures that would then be distributed throughout Europe. But these trade routes were more than just conduits for goods. They also facilitated the exchange of ideas, technologies, and cultures. The compass, gunpowder, and paper all spread along these routes, changing the face of warfare and communication. Religious ideas, scientific knowledge, and artistic styles also traveled these paths, leading to cultural cross-pollination on an unprecedented scale. However, life along these trade routes was far from easy. Merchants faced numerous perils, from storms at sea to bandits on land. Diseases like the Black Death also spread along these routes, devastating populations and reshaping societies. And let's not forget the constant threat of piracy, which plagued maritime trade routes throughout the medieval period. As we drift off to sleep, imagine the sights, sounds, and smells of a bustling medieval marketplace. The cries of merchants hawking their wares, the aroma of exotic spices, the glint of gold and silver, all brought together by the vast network of trade routes that connected the medieval world. As we sail through the mists of time, let's explore the enduring legacy of the Vikings, those fierce Norse warriors who left an indelible mark on European history. While often remembered for their raids and conquests, the Viking influence extends far beyond their reputation as fearsome seafarers. The Viking Age, spanning from the late 8th to the mid-11th century, saw these Scandinavian adventurers venturing across Europe, reaching as far as North America. Their longships, masterpieces of naval engineering, allowed them to navigate both open seas and shallow rivers with unparalleled efficiency. But the Vikings were more than just raiders. They were also skilled traders, artisans, and settlers. Their impact on language is still evident today. The English language, for instance, borrowed numerous words from Old Norse. Common terms like sky, egg, law, and even days of the week like Thursday, Thor's Day, have Viking origins. In the realm of governance, the Vikings left their mark as well. The Thing, an early form of parliamentary government, was a Viking institution. These assemblies, where free men gathered to make laws and settle disputes, laid the groundwork for some of the democratic principles we value today. Viking exploration led to the settlement of Iceland and Greenland, and even a brief presence in North America, predating Columbus by centuries. Leif Erikson's voyage to Vinland, believed to be in modern-day Newfoundland, stands as a testament to their adventurous spirit and nautical prowess. The artistic legacy of the Vikings is equally impressive. Their intricate metalwork, particularly in jewelry and weaponry, showcases a level of craftsmanship that continues to inspire artists and designers. The famous Oseberg ship, discovered in Norway, reveals the Vikings' appreciation for both functionality and aesthetic beauty in their crafts. Viking mythology has also left an enduring imprint on popular culture. Norse gods like Odin, Thor, and Loki have found new life in modern literature, films, and comic books. The concept of Valhalla, the great hall where fallen warriors feast with the gods, has become a widely recognized symbol of an honorable afterlife. Even in the field of technology, we can trace some influences back to the Vikings. Their innovative shipbuilding techniques, which allowed for both speed and stability, laid the foundation for advancements in naval architecture. The Viking sundial, a navigational tool, was a precursor to more sophisticated nautical instruments. As we drift away from the fjords and longships of Viking lore, we're left with an appreciation for a culture that was far more complex and influential than often portrayed. Their legacy lives on, not just in our history books, but in our languages, our laws, and our imaginations. The Viking Age, spanning from the late 8th to the mid-11th century, was a period of remarkable exploration and expansion. These Norse seafarers left an indelible mark on history, not just through their raids and conquests, but also through their far-reaching voyages and settlements. As we've discussed, the Vikings' journeys took them far beyond their Scandinavian homelands. They established settlements in the British Isles, Iceland, and even reached as far as Greenland and North America. Their longships, masterpieces of naval engineering, allowed them to navigate both open seas and shallow rivers with equal ease. The legacy of Viking exploration extends beyond mere conquest. They were traders, craftsmen, and colonizers who influenced the cultures and genetics of the lands they visited. Their impact can still be seen today in place names, linguistic influences, and archaeological remains across northern Europe and beyond. However, it's important to remember that the Viking Age wasn't solely about exploration. It was a complex period of cultural exchange, technological advancement, and societal change. The Norse people's interactions with other cultures led to the spread of new ideas, technologies, and even religious beliefs, as evidenced by the gradual Christianization of Scandinavia. As we conclude our discussion on Viking exploration, we're reminded that history is often more nuanced than popular narratives suggest. The Vikings were not just warriors and raiders, but also skilled navigators, traders, and settlers who significantly shaped the world we know today. As we drift deeper into the annals of history, let's shift our focus to another aspect of medieval life that's sure to lull you into a peaceful slumber. We'll now explore the equally monotonous world of medieval trade and commerce, where excitement was as rare as a clean street in a bustling town. As we delve deeper into the intricacies of medieval life, let's turn our attention to a fascinating aspect of urban society, the guilds. These organizations played a crucial role in shaping the economic and social landscape of medieval towns and cities. Guilds were associations of craftsmen or merchants who banded together to regulate their trade, maintain quality standards, and protect their mutual interests. From blacksmiths to weavers, bakers to goldsmiths, these groups formed the backbone of medieval commerce and industry. But what exactly were guilds, and how did they function in the complex tapestry of medieval society? In the bustling towns of medieval Europe, a unique social and economic structure emerged that would shape the urban landscape for centuries to come, the guild system. These organizations of craftsmen and merchants played a pivotal role in regulating trade, maintaining quality standards, and fostering a sense of community among workers. Guilds were essentially associations of artisans or merchants who practiced the same craft or trade. They functioned as both professional networks and regulatory bodies, overseeing everything from production techniques to pricing. The structure of guilds was hierarchical, with three main ranks: masters, journeymen, and apprentices. At the top of the guild hierarchy were the master craftsmen. These were skilled artisans who had completed their training and were authorized to own workshops, take on apprentices, and sell their goods directly to customers. Becoming a master was no easy feat. It often required years of experience and the creation of a masterpiece to demonstrate one's expertise. Below the masters were the journeymen. These were skilled workers who had completed their apprenticeships but had not yet achieved master status. Journeymen typically worked for masters, honing their skills and saving money to eventually open their own workshops. The term journeyman itself comes from the French word journée, meaning day, as they were often paid by the day. At the bottom of the guild structure were the apprentices. Young boys, usually between the ages of 10 and 15, would be bound to a master craftsman for a period of several years. During this time, they lived in the master's household, receiving food, lodging, and training in exchange for their labor. The life of an apprentice was often difficult, with long hours and strict discipline, but it was the first step towards a respectable career. Guilds served several important functions in medieval society. First and foremost, they regulated the quality of goods produced in their respective trades. By setting standards and inspecting products, guilds ensured that customers received reliable, high-quality merchandise. This system helped to build trust in local craftsmanship and protect consumers from shoddy workmanship. Additionally, guilds played a crucial role in controlling competition and protecting their members' interests. They often held monopolies on certain trades within a town, limiting the number of practitioners and setting prices. While this practice could lead to higher costs for consumers, it also provided a measure of economic stability for guild members. Beyond their economic functions, guilds also served important social and religious roles. They often acted as mutual aid societies, providing support for members who fell ill or for the families of deceased craftsmen. Many guilds were associated with particular saints and participated in religious festivals and processions, further cementing their place in the fabric of medieval urban life. As we delve deeper into the life of medieval peasants, let's explore the concept of apprenticeship, a system that offered a glimmer of hope for some young peasants to learn a trade and potentially improve their lot in life. Apprenticeships typically began around the age of 12 or 14, when a child would be sent to live with a master craftsman. This arrangement was often sealed with a formal contract, binding the apprentice to their master for a period of several years, usually between 5 to 9 years, depending on the complexity of the trade. The life of an apprentice was far from easy. They were expected to work long hours, often from dawn to dusk, 6 days a week. Sundays were reserved for religious observance, offering a brief respite from their labors. In exchange for their work, apprentices received room and board, as well as invaluable training in their chosen craft. However, this arrangement came at a cost. Apprentices were essentially unpaid laborers, and their living conditions were often cramped and uncomfortable. The relationship between master and apprentice was complex. While some masters were fair and nurturing, others were harsh taskmasters. Corporal punishment was common, and apprentices had little recourse against abusive treatment. Despite these hardships, apprenticeships offered a unique opportunity for social mobility in an otherwise rigid feudal system. A successful apprentice could eventually become a journeyman, working for wages while honing their skills further. The ultimate goal for many was to achieve the status of master craftsmen, allowing them to open their own workshop and take on apprentices of their own. This path, while difficult, offered a chance to escape the cycle of poverty that trapped most peasants. However, it's important to note that not all apprenticeships led to success. Many apprentices failed to complete their training due to the harsh conditions, illness, or simply lacking the necessary skills. Those who didn't make it often found themselves back in the fields, their dreams of a better life dashed. For female apprentices, the situation was even more challenging. While some trades did accept women, their opportunities were far more limited than those of their male counterparts. Many female apprentices were restricted to traditionally feminine crafts such as weaving or midwifery. The apprenticeship system, for all its flaws, played a crucial role in medieval society. It ensured the continuation of vital trades and crafts, passing knowledge from one generation to the next. It also provided a structured environment for young people to learn discipline and work ethic. As we reflect on the apprenticeship system, we can see both its merits and its drawbacks. While it offered a potential path out of poverty for some, it also exposed young people to exploitation and hardship. Like many aspects of medieval life, it was a system of both opportunity and oppression, hope and struggle. In the bustling towns of medieval Europe, guilds played a crucial role in regulating trade and craftsmanship. These organizations were more than just social clubs for artisans. They were powerful entities that controlled nearly every aspect of production and commerce within their respective industries. Guilds were organized hierarchically, with master craftsmen at the top, followed by journeymen and then apprentices at the bottom. The path to becoming a master was long and arduous, often taking more than a decade of dedicated work and learning. Apprentices would typically begin their training around the age of 12, living with their master and working for little more than food and lodging. They were expected to learn every aspect of the trade, from the most basic tasks to the most complex techniques. After several years of apprenticeship, usually around 7, a trainee could become a journeyman. Journeymen were allowed to work for wages, but were still not permitted to open their own shops or take on apprentices of their own. To achieve the coveted status of master, a journeyman had to produce a masterpiece, an exemplary work that showcased their skills and knowledge of the craft. This piece would be judged by the guild's masters, who would decide if the journeyman was worthy of joining their ranks. Guilds strictly regulated the quality of goods produced by their members. They set standards for materials, techniques, and even pricing. This ensured consistency and quality, but also stifled innovation and competition. The guild system also controlled the number of practitioners in each trade. By limiting the number of apprentices a master could take on and setting high standards for advancement, guilds effectively restricted entry into their professions. While this system provided job security for guild members, it also led to inflated prices for consumers and limited economic growth. The rigid structure of guilds made it difficult for new techniques or products to emerge, as any deviation from established practices could be met with severe penalties. Guilds also played a significant role in the social and political life of medieval towns. They often had representation in town councils and were responsible for organizing festivals, maintaining infrastructure, and even providing military service when required. However, as the medieval period drew to a close and the early modern era began, the guild system started to decline. The rise of centralized governments, new manufacturing techniques, and changing economic theories all contributed to the gradual erosion of guild power and influence. As we delve deeper into the complexities of medieval society, we encounter an influential force that shaped the urban landscape: the guilds. These organizations of craftsmen and merchants played a pivotal role in the economic and social fabric of medieval towns and cities. Guilds were essentially associations of artisans or merchants who practiced the same craft or trade. They emerged as a way to protect the interests of their members and maintain quality standards in their respective industries. From blacksmiths to weavers, bakers to goldsmiths, guilds existed for nearly every conceivable trade. The structure of guilds was hierarchical, typically consisting of 3 levels: apprentices, journeymen, and masters. Apprentices were young individuals learning the trade under the tutelage of a master. This period of apprenticeship could last several years, during which the apprentice lived with the master's family and received food, lodging, and training in exchange for their labor. Upon completing their apprenticeship, individuals became journeymen. These skilled workers could now earn wages but were not yet permitted to open their own shops. To achieve the status of master, a journeyman had to produce a masterpiece, an exemplary work that demonstrated their expertise in the craft. Guilds wielded considerable power within medieval towns. They regulated production, set prices, and controlled the quality of goods. This monopolistic control over their respective trades allowed guilds to maintain high standards, but also led to inflated prices for consumers. The influence of guilds extended beyond mere economic matters. They often played significant roles in local governance, with guild masters frequently holding positions on town councils. Guilds also served important social functions, organizing festivals, funding charitable works, and providing support for members and their families in times of hardship. However, the guild system was not without its drawbacks. The strict regulations and high entry barriers made it difficult for newcomers to establish themselves in a trade. This system often perpetuated existing social hierarchies, with the children of guild masters having distinct advantages in becoming masters themselves. As we drift towards sleep, imagine the bustling medieval town, its streets lined with workshops and storefronts, each bearing the mark of its respective guild. The rhythmic sound of hammers on anvils, the whir of spinning wheels, and the calls of merchants blend into a soothing cacophony of medieval urban life. As we conclude our exploration of medieval guilds, it's clear that these organizations played a pivotal role in shaping the economic and social landscape of the Middle Ages. Their influence extended far beyond mere trade regulation, leaving an indelible mark on urban life and the development of craftsmanship. Guilds weren't without their flaws, however. Their strict hierarchies and monopolistic practices often stifled innovation and limited economic mobility. Yet they also provided a sense of community and security in an otherwise uncertain world. Members could rely on their guild for support during times of hardship, illness, or old age. The legacy of medieval guilds can still be seen today. Modern trade unions, professional associations, and even some aspects of corporate culture can trace their roots back to these ancient organizations. The emphasis on quality control, standardized training, and collective bargaining are all concepts that originated, at least in part, with the guild system. As we drift off to sleep, let's reflect on how these medieval institutions, for better or worse, helped shape the world we live in today. The next time you encounter a craftsperson or a skilled professional, remember that their expertise is part of a tradition that stretches back centuries, to a time when guilds were the guardians of knowledge and skill in the bustling towns of medieval Europe. And so we close this chapter on medieval guilds, leaving behind the echoes of hammering craftsmen, the scent of freshly baked bread, and the colorful banners of guild processions. May these images of a bygone era accompany you into peaceful slumber. As we conclude our journey through the less glamorous aspects of history, it's worth reflecting on how these seemingly mundane details shape our understanding of the past. The lives of medieval peasants, the challenges of ancient hygiene, and the peculiarities of historical diets may not be the stuff of epic tales, but they offer invaluable insights into the human experience across time. These stories remind us that history isn't just about kings, queens, and grand battles. It's about the everyday struggles and triumphs of ordinary people who lived, worked, and persevered through conditions we can scarcely imagine today. Their experiences, though often overlooked, form the foundation of our modern world. By examining these less than exciting aspects of history, we gain a deeper appreciation for the progress we've made as a society. The next time you enjoy a hot shower, eat a balanced meal, or benefit from modern medicine, remember that these luxuries were once unimaginable to our ancestors. Moreover, understanding the hardships of the past can foster empathy and gratitude. It helps us recognize the resilience of those who came before us and appreciate the comforts we often take for granted. While we may face our own challenges today, the perspective gained from studying history can provide both comfort and inspiration. As you drift off to sleep, let these tales of bygone eras remind you of the ever-evolving story of humanity. From the fields of medieval Europe to the bustling streets of ancient Rome, each era has its own unique narrative, waiting to be explored and